On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 10.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. Junior Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt has announced she's running to become the next Conservative leader, becoming the 9th candidate. In a video posted on Twitter, Mordaunt made her case to the public.
Our leadership has to change. It needs to become a little less about the leader and a lot more about the ship. I'm Penny Mordaunt, and I'm ready to serve as the next leader of the Conservative Party.
8 other Conservatives have also put themselves forward to be the next Prime Minister, as taxes are becoming a focal point of the leadership contest. Former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid have both pledged to cut taxes in separate bids for the leadership. Meanwhile, there are calls for an immediate investigation into claims Boris Johnson lobbied for a young woman to get a City Hall job during his time as London Mayor. The Sunday Times has reported there were allegations Mr Johnson advocated for a role for her in 2008, just weeks after they met. At least 6 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. Thousands gathered in the US Capitol to protest the reversal of abortion rights. The demonstration in Washington, D.C. came 2 weeks after the Supreme Court repealed Roe v. Wade, the ruling that had guaranteed abortion access nationwide for nearly 50 years. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced he'll be stepping down this week after protesters stormed his official residence and set the Prime Minister's house on fire. The PM and President were not in the buildings at the time. The Royal Air Force has sent 6 fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. It comes just weeks after the 2 countries applied to join NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and is part of an increased presence in the region. Novak Djokovic says mental strength may be more important going into today's Wimbledon men's final against Nick Kyrgios. Djokovic is going for a 4th consecutive title win at SW19, while Kyrgios is going for his first Grand Slam title. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are planning to attend. The Duchess of Cornwall has revealed she can get nervous before high-profile events. Camilla's told a documentary due to be broadcast this week that she just takes a deep breath and gets on with it. And parts of the UK could see temperatures pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius today, as a heat health alert has been issued for most of the country. The heat wave is likely to last into next week, with temperatures set to soar above 32 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. Now, time for today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
This morning, a widely dry start, though some light rain will affect Shetland and Orkney for a time. For most, it will be a bright start, though there'll be some cloud across the northwest. Across Scotland, there'll be low cloud across some northwestern coast, though it will be a dry start for most. This low cloud will also affect the coast of northern England and Northern Ireland at first. Elsewhere, there'll be plenty of lengthy sunny periods throughout the morning. Across northern Wales, there'll be some patchy cloud around at first, so this will clear through the morning to leave a dry, fine and sunny day across Wales and central parts of England. It'll be a warm day everywhere today, but it will be especially hot for southern England, where highs of 29 Celsius are possible. For this afternoon, across the UK, it will remain dry with plenty of sunshine for all.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
How many people are we going to take? How many people? How many?
Votes,
How
which
many?
means that every again. So
How many people? How many people? Stephen, how many people would you accept into this country?
You can't put a number on it.
You.
And a very good morning to one and all. The sun is shining. It's Sunday the 10th of July. And yes, it's time for Tice Talk. For the next 3 hours, we have an action-packed, a full-on show. Because guess what? There is quite a lot to talk about. I mean, what a week we have just gone through. My Sunday sermon last week was talking about Scotland, and there was a bit of noise about Boris. But no one really knew what was to come after the bombshell revelation on Tuesday from a senior civil servant, and that led really to a series of resignations, and essentially it meant that the reign of Boris has come to an end, and we're now looking at life after Boris. So obviously I've got to look at the leadership. What do we want in a manifesto for a new leader? But in the second hour of the show, I'm also going to be talking big time about climate sanity, the protests around Europe. We've got to talk about the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, good or bad, energy price rises, so much to talk about. There really is. And of course, we've got the tennis this afternoon. And amongst all of this serious stuff, let's have a bit of fun as well. So I thought what I'd do for each week of this leadership campaign, I'd have a sort of, you remember the game Snakes and Ladders? Well, I'm going to have my own leadership, Snakes and Ladders. Who's climbing up the ladder and who's slithering and sliding down, snake-like, down the ladder on the leadership Snakes and Ladders over the next few weeks. And you can already see it. Rishi Sunak, I think he probably thought he was at the top of the ladder. You've already seen potentially Ben Wallace. He slid from being favourite. He slid right down to the bottom of the snake. He's not even at the starting board. He's not even going for the leadership. And who's your snake of the week? I've got one. I'll be reviewing that later. We've got so much to talk about. Great guests, MPs, professors. But my big question to you is, what do you want in your manifesto? If you were leader or standing for leadership, what's your leadership manifesto? And would you scrap net zero? Because only one of them so far is talking about net zero, about amongst the 9 candidates who have already said they're going to stand. So, my friends, my listeners, stay with us. Send us your views, your thoughts. You know the tweet. It's tweet at TalkTV. The number, of course, is 0344 499 1000. The show only works if you call with your views, and there's never a better time. I want to hear your thoughts. Release your pent-up frustrations. I may not be able to cure them, but I can certainly help you get them off your chest. That's what makes a great show. And you're listening for the next 3 hours. It's Tice Talk. It is, of course, Talk TV. And there we are. That music, of course, means that it is time. Yes, it is time for my Sunday sermon. Now, the leadership election. Well, I was quite surprised the other day to see that I was at the odds with a well-known bookmaker of 100 to 1. I thought that's interesting. Amusingly, I was on air with Piers Morgan at the time, and he was fuming that he was even further out in the odds at 250 to 1. He felt he had more qualities to be leader. There is a technical problem, of course, which is that I'm not actually I'm not a Conservative, I'm a Reformer, and I'm not actually an MP. So it may have escaped the bookies' notice, but a friend of mine did very sweetly actually put £1 on and send me the betting slip just for historical purposes. So I thought, well, what's my dream manifesto for the next leader? And that's what I want you to call in later with, you know, to give us a call or tweet us or text 87222 with what's on your manifesto. And mine is very clear. I want to make Britain great by doing Brexit properly. And there are 3 ways to do that. Firstly, we've got to put more money in your pocket. Not in the pockets of civil servants or back in the Treasury. More money in your pocket. So I would be cutting taxes hard on things like fuel duty, cutting VAT on energy bills, cutting all of the environmental levies. Because what that does, and reducing general VAT, because if you do that, then you reduce the price of consumer goods, which puts more money in your pocket, but at the same time, it actually reduces inflation because it reduces the price of goods, and therefore it changes the direction of travel. And lower taxes creates more growth, that creates higher wages, more jobs, and therefore more tax revenues in the medium term. I think we're just beginning to get the signs of a proper debate amongst the Conservative leadership candidates about this, although for some reason that completely escapes me, sort of the leading candidate, Rishi Sunak, is saying there's no place for tax cuts in his campaign. And he claims to be the serious candidate. Really? Is that serious? I wonder. Also, the other way of putting more money in your pocket is to cut all the wasteful spending that goes on. The second thing I'd do is scrap Westminster's obsession with net zero. And there's one candidate out of the 9 who's already talking about the drawbacks of net zero, and that is Kemi Badenoch, one to be watched. Instead, we need to be completely self-reliant on energy, and then we'd have much cheaper energy. And the way to do that, of course, and this is the best way to level up, is to unleash the treasure of shale gas under our feet. I know I've banged on about it before, but I'll say it again. You can have £1 trillion of levelling up by drilling down. Just think about that. You don't need a minister of levelling up to work out what it means. That's what it means. So that's the second thing I would do. And the third thing is I would make it clear, and no one's doing this at the moment, that we need to manage and run our country much better. We need to transform the way our public services are delivered faster, better, quicker. For us, who, by the way, we're the customer. We actually pay the bills. And, for example, the civil service. I know this sounds a bit ridiculous, but the only person who talked about reforming the civil service was the one and only Dominic Cummings. Should he come back to sort the civil service out? I'd also change critical things, like the House of Lords. More of that later. Be interesting to look at Boris's dissolution honours list. As I say, more of that later. We need to change the electoral system. We need to change the postal voting system. These are the key things to make our country be run, managed and governed better. And that's what I want your calls on, to let us know what's on your wish list. What do you want? Do you think Sunak's right? Do you think you've got to wait for tax changes? Do you think you've got to leave them at the current levels? Or do you want even more money invested in public services? Do you think they should be raising taxes? These are all the things that are going to be talked about. At least we're now having a debate. Because before, there was no debate at all. Under Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, there was really no proper debate about the extent of tax cuts. And all of a sudden, that is now the big, big topic. But I want them to look further than that. I want them to look at net zero. I want them to look at the way we run and manage our country. There's so much opportunity. There's so much we can do better and better. There really is. But it requires courage, it requires leadership, and I want to hear from you who you think is the person to provide that courage, that determination, that leadership. Is it one of the cabinet members? Or is it someone from outside? Is it the likes of Tom Tugendhat or Penny Mordaunt or Kemi Badenoch? You know the number. Give us a call. So to finish, I'll say again, let's make Britain great. Let's do Brexit properly. Let's cut taxes. Let's scrap the absurd net zero obsession. And let's run this great country much, much better. That is the conclusion of this week's Sunday Sermon. Well, there we are. That's my Sunday sermon, and it is going to be a busy show. After the break, we are going to be talking to the esteemed commentator, the brilliant Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday, with his views. He always knows what is happening. But already, the tweets are coming in. And interesting, one's just said, and I didn't mention it, but it is absolutely vital to be tough on crime and criminals. Rob here, he said, I know you know, it doesn't really matter who becomes leader for the Conservatives come the next election, unless they cut taxes, including net zero, and stop the illegal invasion of the country, they won't win anyway. Interesting. There we are. So what's this says here? Another tweet's come in. If Sir Keir crossed the floor, I don't think there's much chance of that, and became the Tory, that's very strange, he always was, that would support Starmer for being the next Prime Minister. I think they don't quite understand that. There we go. Penny Mordaunt has, of course, announced she's standing. There's a tweet here, best news I've heard. This comes from Newsmonger saying he's happy that she's standing. He's a senior in his 70s, been a Conservative all my life. She will unite the party and make the party be winners again. Well, that may be the case, but she has just put out, not one, not two, not three, 8 tweets it's taken Penny Mordaunt to clarify her views on what a woman is. I only need one tweet to clarify what a woman is. A woman is an adult, female, human being. And I don't understand why Penny Mordaunt has taken 8 weeks. She says that legally, a trans woman is female. What's your view on that? I'm not sure that's going to go down well with the Conservative base. Here we are, there's another one here, a message has come in. My manifesto would be to lower taxes, reduce the size of the state, absolutely right. Scrap net zero, take the illegal migrants back to France, start North Sea oil development, mining coal, that's right, that's another big topic, going for shale gas, and abolish the two-party system. Lots of great ideas coming in. You know the number, 0344 499 1000. I want your thoughts, your views, your manifesto. This is the moment, this is the time. And we, for the next few weeks, my leadership board, my snakes and ladders game, we'll be looking at who's climbing, who's falling. For me, I think that an outsider, the likes of Kemi Badenoch, is climbing rapidly up the ladder. And I think that certain people are sliding and slithering down the snake to the bottom of the leadership board. But we'll hear from Dan Hodges after the break as to what he thinks is really going on behind the scenes. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. There is so much to talk about. The tweets and the texts are pouring in. A lot of support for Penny Mordaunt, who's just announced that she is definitely standing. One here said, Richard, slightly disappointing hearing you discussing the new leader of a has-been party. What's happened to your ambition? That's from Keith. Well, the reality is the Conservative Party are the party in government and it needs a new leader. And there is almost no one better to understand what's really going on in the corridors of power, in those dark corners, sort of discussions, and really what sort of skullduggery is going on. There was an extraordinary headline in yesterday's Daily Telegraph that said the Tory MPs are the most duplicitous bunch of people ever. Well, anyway, if you really want to know what's going on, you need to read Dan Hodges' column, page 43 this week of the Mail on Sunday, and amongst all his busy schedule, I'm delighted that he's with us now this morning. Dan, a very good morning to you. What an extraordinary time. Who knew a week ago this would happen just so quickly? We've now got 9 candidates. Are there any more to come, do you think?
Well, we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think it would probably be easier if those members of the Conservative Party who weren't running for the leadership actually issued statements, given the number of them that we've had piling in over the last few days. I mean, look, I mean, it's going to be pretty wild, and it's going to be pretty chaotic, and frankly, it's going to be pretty shambolic for the next few days. You know, there's no clear front runner. So many candidates are what we call in the sort of political trade running for position, which means they're not actually running because they think they have a chance of becoming Prime Minister. They're running because if they have a half-decent showing, they're then guaranteed a cabinet position.
Right, so that's a critical part of their thinking.
Exactly, yeah. And but I mean, the one crucial thing is, from what I understand from talking to Tory MPs, there's very much an appetite on the Tory backbenches and amongst those who are standing and likely to be elected to the influential 1922 backbench committee, that they want certainly the first stage of the election to be conducted very, very quickly. I mean, there's even talk about having, the field whittled down to the final 2 by the end of this week. How they're going to manage that, given the number of candidates, is going to be interesting to see. But at the moment, what it seems they're going to do is they're going to set the nomination. Well, I mean, they're certainly going to raise the nomination threshold very high, set it at quite a high bar.
Right.
And will itself cull some of the sort of minor candidates and then run through the voting very, very quickly.
Because personally, I was actually a bit disappointed, Dan, that the 22 has taken so long. I felt, and I said, they should have been meeting last Thursday and Friday, set the timetable then, keep it short, because actually, in my view, we need a new leader in place by mid-August, 4 to 5 weeks' time, not sort of early September, given all the challenges the country faces. Is that realistic? Is that possible? And is there any chance that when you get to the last 2, one of them might actually be persuaded to stand down?
Well, let's take this question. I mean, I don't agree with you that this needs to be a rushed process. I think quite the opposite. We had all sorts of mayhem and hysteria this week. Tory MPs last week were running around like headless chickens. They hadn't had any sleep. They were exhausted. There was a moment when it looked like Boris was going to try and do a Donald Trump. It was getting pretty wild there last week. Excuse me. What the Tory party, but Boris is going. He's not going to do anything stupid. He's not interested in doing anything stupid. Part of the problem was he wasn't always that interested in doing what he was supposed to be doing in government when he was Prime Minister anyway. He's not going to do anything stupid. The key thing from the Conservative Party's perspective now is not that they choose a quick candidate, but that they choose the right candidate. And in particular, they need to avoid the mistake they made when they suddenly, straight after David Cameron resigned, when they suddenly grabbed onto Theresa May, bundled her into Downing Street, and the whole thing fell apart. There's no rush. There's no great need for urgency. I do think they need to whittle down this vast field relatively quickly, because at the moment they're all running around sort of slashing each other, trying to get position with each other. But then they need to sort of step back in a very clear, sober way get the two main candidates, let them set out their stalls, let them set out their philosophies, do the hustings, go around the country, let people see what they are, let's test their mettle, because the person, two things, obviously, they're not just electing a Tory leader, they're electing a Prime Minister for all of us. And the second thing is, this is the last chance the Tories have got before the next election. Whoever they get in now is the person who's going to fight the election for them. They're not going to have another chance to throw someone out and get someone else in. So they've got to get it right. And taking a little bit of time to get it right, I don't think is a problem for them.
And do you think that there's a lot of talk about what's on the agenda, and most of them are talking about cutting taxes, except really what might be considered the front runner, Rishi Sunak. I was very surprised, and I've been quite critical of him coming out saying he's the serious candidate, and this isn't the time to be cutting taxes. Do you think MPs are going to be voting on their agenda or their ability to win an election? Because they may or may not be the same thing.
Well, it depends. I mean, I think on that very specific point, I was actually, and I've been very critical of Rishi Sunak as Chancellor, I was actually very impressed by that statement, because Rishi Sunak is absolutely right. I understand the desire of everybody in the Conservative Party, and indeed everybody in the country, to cut taxes. But that is not the priority at the moment. We are in the midst of an inflationary crisis. Everybody sort of euphemistically calls it a cost of living crisis. It's an old-style inflationary crisis. And the priority at the moment is somebody has to get a grip of the national finances and get a grip of the economy. The first priority has to be to get inflation down. And the only way you get inflation down is to withdraw money from the economy. It's hard, it's difficult, it hurts people, but that is the only way you get a grip. And the fact that Rishi Sunak has had actually the courage to say that to his party, I actually think that's in his favour.
Interesting. Here's where I differ with you on that. The issue there, Dan, is that this is a cost-push inflation driven mainly by supplies coming in from outside the country. It's not a demand-pull inflation by a surplus of money. And mathematically, if you cut things like taxes on various things, you have a one-off reduction in the rate of inflation. So that's where I differ you on you. But clearly, running the economy is serious. But I think the strength of the government's finances and the balance sheet is much stronger than perhaps we're being really told.
Well, we can have an economic debate. I mean, I completely disagree with that. I mean, after as I said in my column, the key thing is, after the sort of the monopoly money spending that we saw at the time of COVID, yes, we are going to have to start to get a grip of the of the finances.
I guess the point is how we grow the economy faster, isn't it? To do that, obviously
we've got to grow the economy. But as I said, at the moment, the number one problem we have is an inflationary crisis, an inflationary spiral. At the moment, I'm seeing Tory candidates running around saying we need to simultaneously saying we need to slash taxes and we need to massively increase spending. We have to increase defence spending. We have to have the levelling up agenda. We have to do this. We have to do that. We need more police, more teachers.
So you think that could actually work against them by not being seen as serious enough amongst the MPs?
Because this is the lesson the Conservatives have to learn from the Boris Johnson years.
Fascinating. Dan, I've got to run to the news, but Dan, that is fascinating, and I'm enormously grateful to you for giving up some time this Sunday morning on that. That's Dan Hodges. His view is that the serious candidate, Rishi Sunak, is right and not to be talking about tax cuts. Give us your views. You know the number, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us. I'll be taking your calls. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
It's no holds barred on my show, Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Idiotic, insensible, hypocritical.
The blows.
You must not do that.
The punch-ups.
Are you interviewing me or am I interviewing you?
The fights.
There'll always be somebody else to fight. I didn't come here for long, good day.
And the knockouts. It was a free and fair election, and that you lost.
Turn the camera off.
Come and find me on Talk TV. You know you want it.
But of course it's uncensored.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. Junior Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt has announced she's running to become the next Conservative leader, becoming the 9th candidate. In a video posted on Twitter, Mordaunt made her case to the public.
Our leadership has to change. It needs to become a little less about the leader and a lot more about the ship. I'm Penny Mordaunt, and I'm ready to serve as the next leader of the Conservative Party.
8 other Conservatives have also put themselves forward to be the next Prime Minister as taxes are becoming a focal point of the leadership contest. Former Health Secretaries Jeremy Hunt and Sajid Javid have both pledged to cut taxes in separate bids for the leadership. Meanwhile, there are calls for an immediate investigation into claims Boris Johnson lobbied for a young woman to get a City Hall job during his time as London Mayor. The Sunday Times has reported there were allegations Mr. Johnson advocated for a role for her in 2008, just weeks after they met. At least 6 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. Novak Djokovic says mental strength may be more important going into today's Wimbledon men's final against Nick Kyrgios. Djokovic is going for a 4th consecutive title win at SW19, while Kyrgios is going for his first Grand Slam title. And parts of the UK could see temperatures pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius today as a heat health alert has been issued for most of the country. The heat wave is likely to last into next week, with temperatures set to soar above 32 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. Well, that was Dan Hodges, the commentator from the Mail on Sunday. He knows a thing or two. Do read his column if you really want the insight. He thinks that actually Rishi is right. He is the serious candidate. There isn't room in the finances for tax cuts, unlike almost all of the other leadership candidates. I disagree with him, but I want your thoughts, your views. We've got one here from Alex who says, my top 3 priorities for the new PM are immigration, net zero and complete a proper Brexit. Lots of other messages, lots of other support. One here who says that if anyone addresses immigration inflation, they'll win the next election. I think it's mainly going to be about tax cuts. One here that's just said, I've just emailed Suella Braverman to support her. Her manifesto of growth, security and opportunity is almost exactly the same. There we are. Well, let's see what the first caller of the morning from Norwich. Barry, good morning. How are we?
Hello, I'm good, thank you, Richard. You
yeah, right? Tremendous. Fascinating time. Fascinating time. What's on your manifesto, Barry?
Well, I'd just like to say a couple of things if I could. First of all, we need to get rid of this horrible 2-party system in this country. It's first past the post. We need to get into proportional representation.
I agree entirely.
We need to get rid of this. All we're going to get is the same old, same old. It's just like a wheel, just go round and round and round with the same old parties, the same old people, the same old things, and it's just getting tedious, to be frank. Me, personally, I'm really angry at Boris because I voted for Boris in 2019. For the first time, I voted Conservative because I wanted him to get Brexit done.
Yes.
And I'm angry at him because he's just thrown it all away. With an 80-seat majority, he had it all in his hands.
He really did.
He's blowing it, and I just don't understand how you can go from an 80-seat majority 2.5 years ago to this.
It is remarkable. It's the greatest wasted opportunity, probably in political history.
It's just baffling, and so I'm angry at that because I can't vote for my party, the Labour Party, because Keir Starmer, as long as he's there, I will never forgive him to trying to reverse the democratic vote in this country. That man was part of people trying to reverse democracy in this country, so I can never vote for that party while he's there because I just don't trust him.
Interesting. And there's many other like you.
Yeah. So for me, I'm stuck. Next time there's a general election, I'm going to be stuck because I don't know who to vote for.
That's you're quite right. But actually, on the doors, Barry, I think more and more people want proportional representation. The 2-party system, as you quite rightly say, otherwise you're worried it's a wasted vote if you vote for someone else. There's a real appetite, even in the Labour Party, actually now, Barry. There's a recognition it's almost impossible for them to win a majority because of their loss of Scotland under the 2-party system. So I think there's going to be a surge of enthusiasm for PR. I can actually see a way we have it within 3 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to vote for someone like your party. Do you know what I mean? But I know, under the system that we've got, you ain't really got a catch in hell's chance, have you, getting into power? That's why.
On the first past the post, it's really, really, really tricky.
And it's really, I don't want to see a Labour Party SNP coalition. Thank you very much. No,
well, that's there we are. Barry,
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I'm stuck.
You're stuck, Barry. You're stuck in Norwich. We'll enjoy Norwich. It's a wonderful, wonderful place, and enjoy the rest of the day. We're going to head from Norwich further north to Burton-on-Trent, where Tracy is on the line. Morning, Tracy.
Good morning, Richard. Thank you for taking my call.
Pleasure. What's on your mind? What's on your manifesto, Tracy?
What's in my manifesto? To be honest, a couple of months ago, I had a major paradigm shift in my political thoughts. And I actually sat down and I thought, what have the Tories been doing for the past 12 years? And the answer came back to me, well, nothing particularly Tory. And they always consider, we have conservative voters. They don't. They have, I loan them my vote. And they have done very little to help this country. They seem to like being in power, but they don't actually want to do anything. They, with Labour, have been encouraged to waste billions of pounds in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Labour are not an alternative because, let's be brutally honest, Labour spend all the money and then the Tories have to come in and sort the economy back out.
But don't you think the Tories have spent all the money, having spent 400 billion on COVID?
Spent all the money. And yes, I do. And the thing that's caused my paradigm shift is that nobody in the government, nobody in the cabinet, nobody in the Conservative Party has been talking solutions, okay? You and the Reform Party have been talking solutions that are costed out, that say, well, this is how much we think it's going to cost. This is what we think the result will be. All the Tories seem to be doing is, well, we'll just sit there and do nothing. And personally for me, we have got to do something. You cannot have old age pensioners that are paying a third of their old age pensions for heating. You can't have that.
Tracy, you are so right. And later on in the show, I'm afraid, going to be talking about the even higher growth forecast in energy prices. So stay with us on that. It's terrifying, and it requires action now.
It does, and people have to, like Barry was saying, why vote Reform because they're not going to get in? This country needs a major shift because actually, if you just why vote for I'm voting for something that is not as bad as the other one. We deserve better than that.
We need a much more optimistic, hopeful choice than that. You're so right, Tracy. Thank you very much for those thoughts. That's Tracy in Burton-on-Trent. She wants more choice. She wants a more optimistic opportunity. We're going to head to Ireland, to, I think it's Derry Noose, where Shane is on the line. Morning, Shane.
Good morning, Mr. Tice. How are you?
I'm tremendous. Have I pronounced that right? Is it Derry Moose?
Derry Noose.
Derry Noose, thank you.
South Armagh. But I wanted to say there, right, I would be speaking now as an Irish Republican. And you know what a lot of them think of the Tory party, but I think it's shocking what has happened to Boris.
Okay.
It's an absolute disgrace. And the whole Tory party are like a pin of sheep. When one of them escaped, they all ran out. Nobody with a backbone. And I was saying about the new leader. I think the new leader should be that Tom man.
Tom Tugendhat.
The ex-army man.
Yes.
Because I tell you, he has a very intimidating look. He looks like Anthony Hopkins out of the Silence of the Lambs, right? And we need a dude like that in power to deal with Putin.
Right, so you think he looks the hard man?
Yeah, intimidating. We need someone that will stand up. He's ex-army. He would realise what poverty is. He would realise a lot of things. Plus, there was an ex-army woman as well. She was in the Navy or something.
Yes, Penny Mordaunt. She's just thrown her hat in the ring this morning, Shane.
Yeah, but we don't want a woman in power who cannot give a straight answer What's the definition of a woman?
Well,
all she had to say was, well, my mother's a woman.
Yeah, that's right. She's kindly set out her views. It has taken her 8 tweets to try to clarify her views.
Listen, it's shocking.
It's
all to do with the transgender community.
Correct, Shane. It's absurd. Shane, thank you so much for your thoughts. I think you're right. I think it could well be an outsider from outside the cabinet. Tom Tugendhat is clearly a very robust, strong, talented individual. Likewise, Penny Mordaunt, but she needs to sort that out. Otherwise, I think that could be the end of her campaign. Kemi Badenoch. But Dan Hodges thinks many of them are just jockeying for positions in the cabinet. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to John Redwood, MP for Wokingham. He knows exactly what's going on. It'll be interesting to hear his views about inflation, the economy and tax cuts. Does he agree with Dan Hodges or does he agree with me? It's Tice Talk. Stay with us. Welcome back to Tice Talk this morning, and loads of messages and calls coming in, and tweets and all sorts going on. We haven't actually got John Redwood with us at the moment. Maybe he has decided that he's going to throw his hat in the ring. I mean, after what everybody else seems to have done. We've got a tweet here that says, I can't believe David Davis hasn't thrown his hat into the ring as the new leader. He's one of the few that could sort this mess out. Let's wait and see. If we do get John on the line, we'll ask him directly. Then we've got another one here who says that I'm in my 70s, been a Conservative supporter since Alex Douglas Hume. I'm thrilled Penny Mordaunt's standing. She'll be good for the party, good for the electorate, and an excellent start for this country. Go Girl is from Newsmonger. Well, Newsmonger, you just need to ask Penny, what's a woman? But otherwise, there is lots of support and excitement that she is standing, which is great. Let's go to Nigel, who is here in London. Morning, Nigel.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good. What are your thoughts? Are you? Have you written your manifesto?
Well, let's wait another 20 years, and then maybe it'll be me running for leadership.
Just quickly, Nigel, because I've got John on the line. What are your thoughts this morning?
What's my thoughts? I think, it's a variety of candidates, a very diverse variety, which we are able to do being Conservatives. I think, personally, if I was to back someone now and someone realistically, I think I would put my choices between Suella and between Kim.
Between Kemi and Suella. Interesting.
Kim and Suella. I do also like Grant Shapps, and I do know him.
Yes, I mean, I don't know him well, but interesting. He's the Transport Secretary. Interesting. Well, that's fantastic, Nigel. Thank you very much for those thoughts. And what's interesting about that, and we're seeing this on the messages coming through, there's actually very little support for the favourite, Rishi Sunak. Lots of support for Penny Mordaunt, Suella, a little bit for Kemi Badenoch. Steve Baker's declared he's not standing. He is supporting Suella. I'm delighted we've now got the Conservative MP for Wokingham, John Redwood, on the line. He was a little bit late on. I just wondered if he was submitting his nomination papers. Morning, John.
Morning. No, I've been waiting for you. It's your end that's been late. Up in the morning, bright and early as I am.
Indeed. Great to have you on board. Well, this is a fascinating time, John, and in a sense, we've now got, I think, 9 candidates at the last count, and the vast majority of them talking about something that I think is very dear to your and my heart, which is tax cuts. You've obviously been having a word in their show, like.
Well, I and others, yes. I've been, I think, leading the charge for lower taxes, and I've been in disagreement with Mr. Sunak. So I'm not at all surprised that he's not getting a lot of support from your viewers. I think it's very important that this leadership election draws a line under the Sunak mistakes on economic policy. We will not get our way out of a potential recession by trying to tax our way out of it. And he was one of the causes of the inflation we're now suffering, because, of course, he was the person who authorised every penny of all the 450 billion extra money they printed. Now, I and others agreed with them taking strong action in the early days of COVID when the whole economy was closed down. But I think he went on doing it for too long, well into the recovery, and that was clearly inflationary. So I'm very pleased that most of the leadership candidates seem to agree with this. They seem to understand that we now need to be in recession-fighting mode. Inflation will come down next year, whatever they do now. We see world commodity prices beginning to come down very helpfully. And we see domestically signs that the worst inflationary pressures will probably pass when we get the awful further shock on our energy bills in October.
Yes.
So that's a bit better background. But we now need also to find out from the candidates that do want lower taxes how they're going to curb excesses and waste in the state sector, because we also need a bit more financial discipline on spending.
That's right, and that was something I mentioned in my sermon when I talked about cutting wasteful spending. We certainly need to hear that. Why do you think Rishi Sunak has, in a sense, set his stall out saying that he's the serious candidate and he's not for tax cuts? I mean, he could say he knows the balance sheet better than anybody, and he says that we can't afford them.
Well, there's no evidence that he knows the balance sheet better than anybody. I mean, unfortunately, he's been relying on Treasury and OBR forecasts, which have been wildly wrong throughout the post-Brexit period in particular. And they got especially wrong last year when I and others were saying to him, this is going to be a fast growth year. You've injected so much cash and you've allowed so much excess spending that there's going to be super growth, and therefore the revenues are going to come pouring in on a scale the Treasury didn't predict. That was what happened. Now we're in danger, as he leaves the Treasury, of the reverse effect starting to kick in, that the very high tax rises put in on top of the big hit to real incomes from the fuel increases could mean revenue starts to fall short later this year and into next year compared with the Treasury forecasts. So I don't accept the proposition that he knows the right answers. I think he was entirely guided by Treasury and OBR advice and forecasts which were clearly wrong, and he needed to cut loose from those, and I'm very glad the other leadership candidates are doing so.
And I'm with you on this need to cut taxes, John, but I had just earlier, I had Dan Hodges on, the Mail on Sunday commentator, and he says that Rishi's right, and we had a bit of a ding-dong about this. He says if you cut taxes now, that will be inflationary, and there wasn't long enough to be able to go into a full-on debate about that. But why are those people wrong? If you cut taxes, you put more money in people's pockets. Help my listeners and viewers, why is that not inflationary, John?
Well, it's not inflationary because if you spend more than you're collecting in taxes, you have to borrow the money, and the government typically borrows the money for a 10-year period or so. And so that is money which the private sector cannot spend because it lends it to the government. So instead of the private sector spending the money, the government spends the money, but it shouldn't net be inflationary. You only get inflation if you then allow a big monetary expansion, lots of credit, lots of lending through the private sector, which clearly the Bank of England is now not going to do. The Bank of England has lurched from money being far too easy and therefore very inflationary to money being really quite tight. And so I'm much more relaxed about the inflation outlook next year. Indeed, it's one of the few areas where I agree with the Treasury and the Bank of England, because they too think inflation is going to come tumbling next year.
And so that's interesting. So you're saying one of the balancing items is to increase interest rates, which the Bank of England's talked about, possibly belatedly. Where would you, John, like to see interest rates go to act as that partial counterbalance on inflation?
No, I think they've done it. We've had 5 hikes already, but the important change they made was they stopped printing money. Why have we got inflation now? It's because Sunak and the bank decided to print £450 billion. They created money out of thin air, and they went shopping and bought up a whole load of government debt in order to keep interest rates on the floor. Well, interest rates have gone up quite a bit now from zero, and money is a lot tighter. And it's the bank's job to watch the extension of credit and the growth of money. I think the money supply is now under reasonable control, and so you'll see inflation lower next year in the state. So you don't have to believe me on this occasion. You can even believe the bank and Treasury. And one of the things the Treasury withholds from you is they come up with totally bogus figures about how much debt interest is, because they lump in the non-cash item of the index bonds. Yes. But on their definition, the interest charges come roaring down. They are saying that by 2024-25, the government interest cost is going to be 44% lower because, of course, they recognise that inflation is going to tumble.
OK, so, John, you think interest rates don't need to go much higher. You don't see them, I'm guessing, north of 2%. They're currently at 1.25%. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's got to be judged meeting by meeting by the MPC. But I would give one piece of advice to the MPC, and that is to remember that money matters. Money and credit matters. We have an MPC that doesn't usually talk about money and credit, and yet the clue's in the name, the Monetary Policy Committee. So please look at money. You created far too much of it last year. This year, you've tightened up.
John, moving on to the issue of energy and net zero, there's only one candidate so far that I can see, Kemi Badenoch, who's talked about her genuine concern about the obsession with net zero and the cost of that. Yeah, I'm very pro shale gas. I think you are. Have you said yet who you're supporting, and how much of that will be determined by people's views on net zero and growth and shale gas?
No, I haven't made a public declaration. I'm still considering and talking to candidates, and I'm also talking to members and constituents before I make my final decision. And yes, you're right. I think the government has to be realistic about our journey to net zero. And I've been telling them that this decade, worldwide, it's still going to be the decade of fossil fuels. I know that people don't want that, governments don't want it, but we live in a world where India, China and others, and now Germany, are going to greatly expand coal use, which is the last thing that they really need to be doing. So the UK has to be realistic. We have a simple choice. Do we produce our own oil and gas, or do we import more? And if we import more, not only does it cost us a fortune, not only do we not get the big tax revenue on it, but it also generates more CO2 as well. So yes, we need to get more of our own oil and gas out. That is part of any sensible growth strategy. and we have to be realistic about the speed of conversion to net zero. As I tell all those Greens in my constituency who want to go faster, come back and tell me that we should do that when you've put in a heat pump, when you've bought an electric car, and when you've worked out how to buy international products that are made using gas.
I agree entirely. Well, there's a shale gas report sitting on the desk of the business secretary. It'll be interesting whether or not that is sat on, or whether that any form of discussion takes place about that. You'll be interested and amused to see a text has come in here saying John Redwood would be my nominee for Tory leader, smart, right of centre, and reassuring. You can't be persuaded, John?
I don't think there are a lot of MPs queuing up to support a John Redwood leadership bid. So, no, in default of 30 people sending me an email immediately saying they will vote for me, I'm not launching a leadership bid.
Very good,
you
John.
You can relax about that.
Well, John, you've got lots of support amongst some of our listeners and viewers. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday morning. That was John Redwood, Conservative MP for Wokingham. He is pro-tax cuts. He confirms why he doesn't believe that that's inflationary, so that's contrary to what Dan Hodges was saying earlier, and he's concerned about the cost of net zero. Coming up after the news, we will be talking about what's going on elsewhere in Europe. The protests against net zero in the Netherlands are huge, significant, and not being talked about by the mainstream media. But we'll talk about it here on Tice Talk, at the home of common sense. It's Talk TV.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 11.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. The number of contenders in the running for Conservative Party leader has gone up to 9 as Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt joined the race. Taxes and whether or not to cut them is emerging as a focal point of the race, and there are warnings from Tory grandees that the party is ripping itself apart as they call for an end to toxicity. But speaking to Times Radio, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps who's another contender, pledged to keep his campaign clean.
You know, I've spoken to all the other, I think now every other candidate in this campaign and said, you know, the way I will fight this is I'm just not interested in talking about personalities or anything. Let's just talk about the policies, and we can disagree on the emphasis or the detail. That's fine, but actually in the end, we're all Conservatives and we all want what's best for the country.
According to the Mail on Sunday, Liz Truss will also put herself forward, pledging to reverse former Chancellor Rishi Sunak's health tax levy. Conservative MP Julian Knight told Times Radio why he's backing Miss Truss.
Well, I have personal experience of Liz. I've worked with her for a number of years. I find her, she's warm, she has a sense of humour, she's non-factional. She's also the longest-serving cabinet minister, and I think she has broad appeal across the party.
At least 6 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. Hundreds of abortion rights activists marched to the White House yesterday protesting the recent decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. The demonstration in Washington, D.C. came 2 weeks after the Supreme Court repealed the ruling that had guaranteed abortion access nationwide for nearly 50 years. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced he'll be stepping down this week after protesters stormed his official residence and set the Prime Minister's house on fire. The PM and President were not in the buildings at the time. The Royal Air Force has sent 6 fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. It comes just weeks after the 2 countries applied to join NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and is part of an increased presence in the region. Novak Djokovic says mental strength may be more important going into today's Wimbledon men's final against Nick Kyrgios. Djokovic is going for a 4th consecutive title win at SW19, while Kyrgios is going for his first Grand Slam title. The Duchess of Cornwall has revealed she can get nervous before high-profile events. Camilla's told a documentary due to be broadcast this week that she just takes a deep breath and gets on with it. And parts of the UK could see temperatures pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius today as a heat health alert has been issued for most of the country. The heat wave is likely to last into next week, with temperatures set to soar above 32 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. Now time for a closer look at today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV Weather.
This morning, a widely dry start, though some light rain will affect Shetland and Orkney for a time. For most, it will be a bright start, though there'll be some cloud across the northwest. Across Scotland, there'll be low cloud across some northwestern coast, though it will be a dry start for most. This low cloud will also affect the coast of northern England and Northern Ireland at first. Elsewhere, there'll be plenty of lengthy sunny periods throughout the morning. Across northern Wales, there'll be some patchy cloud around at first, so this will clear through the morning to leave a dry, fine and sunny day across Wales and central parts of England. It'll be a warm day everywhere today, but it will be especially hot for southern England, where highs of 29 Celsius are possible. For this afternoon, across the UK, it will remain dry with plenty of sunshine for all.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV Weather.
The bosses at Talk TV have given me and Mike Graham our own show on Saturday nights. Why am I doing this on my own? It's because Mike Graham's late again. He's always late. I'm sick of this. I was promised Piers Morgan. Now I've got to work with Mike Graham. I've had it.
Welcome back, my friends, to Tice Talk. We have flown into the second hour of my 3-hour show, and fascinating, loads of calls and messages pouring in. I have to tell you something really significant. There's not been one single piece of support for the favourite in the Tory leadership candidates, i.e. Rishi Sunak. Not a single message of support. We've got one here from John who says on Twitter, we've been given a list of non-entities standing in the contest. We need people like John Redwood, David Davis and Ian Duncan Smith. Well, I think, John, many would see those as the sort of the senior, the grandees, the very experienced older MPs. But I think probably people are looking forwards and saying they've had their day, I'm guessing. Equally, there's another message here from, who's this from? This is from Jimmy, who says, Socialist Sunak got us into this mess. He's not the answer and he should join the Labour Party. Well, I have to say, I did call him Conrad Sunak or Rishi Corbyn a few weeks ago, and he's still demonstrating those same tax-raising credentials. Let's go to David, who's here in London, on the line. Morning, David.
Hi, Richard. It's about my manifesto.
Yes, please. What's top of your manifesto this morning?
Yeah. This probably won't surprise you, but I would reverse all the changes that Sadiq Khan has made to the roads. I would sack all the walking and cycling commissioners, and that Chris Boardman is one of the cycling promoters. But you see, he used to be a racing cyclist.
Okay, David. So that's very London-centric.
Right.
But what about sort of for the broader? Because obviously we've got listeners and viewers happily across the whole of the UK. Sort of the national picture. What's your manifesto top line on the national picture, David?
To be honest with you, Richard, I'm sorry. I'm so sort of on this cycling.
You're completely obsessed with it.
I haven't thought about that. I'm sorry. I haven't thought about that. Sorry.
No worries at all, David. But have you got a favourite candidate of those that have declared so far?
No one stands out. But can I quickly say one more thing about the cycling, if I may, Richard?
Go for it.
I would also have heavy fines for cyclists and scooterists that go on pavements. Yeah.
Yes, no, that's a good point, David. Thank you so much for that. That's David in London. He's concerned about the impact of the mayor and his anti-car policies and his pro-cycling policies. But I want to hear from you. We've got loads and loads of messages. Interesting, we've got... we're just touching about net zero. Pablo says that it's the sun's variability, that it's a key driver of climate change, not man's CO2. There's also, of course, not only solar variability, there's volcanic activity, sea level rise. And, you know, I agree with that. And it's fascinating that there's almost no reporting. I could only find one small reference in today's Sunday papers to the protests going on in the Netherlands, which are really significant, and which is a protest by the people against their government's obsession with very damaging net zero policies against the farming community in particular. And of course, the Netherlands has a massive, massive agricultural sector. And that's why I'm delighted to be joined by the leader of the Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands, Thierry Baudet. Good morning, Thierry. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk to sort of help educate us, because there's almost no reference in the newspapers. I mean, I picked it up on social media, Thierry. But how significant are the protests in the Netherlands? And just help explain what's really triggered them, please.
Yes. So thank you for having me on the show. It's been a very rough last week where we've had farmer protests across the country. We've seen massive demonstrations. We've also seen initial attempts at blockades, and we've seen shocking police responses, such as shooting with sharp bullets at protesters.
Unbelievable.
Police violence, imprisonment of a 16-year-old boy who was literally just standing by and not doing anything. So the really tensions are rising here in the country, and the reason why, just a short background here, is that we've got a government that's obsessed, as you just introduced, with net zero, and not just net zero in terms of carbon dioxide, but also with criteria about nitrogen oxide. And the thing about nitrogen oxide, the funny thing about it, is that nobody claims that it's even bad for the climate or nature. It's just that if we have a little bit higher levels of nitrogen oxide in the Netherlands, we would have different types of vegetation. And since back in the 1990s, in some European Union directive, it was agreed that the Netherlands would preserve certain small areas in the country with hay, clover, and moss. The Dutch government now feels that we have to expropriate half of our farmers to keep that EU directive. It's an absurd bureaucratic situation, really.
Because this sort of obsession by the government with the net zero targets means they're literally their policies would shut down large chunks of the Dutch farming community's activities. Is that right?
Very much so. And this is not just endangering our own food production, but also for the rest of Europe, because we are a very large exporting nation of meat, of vegetation, of vegetables, and so on. So as we're entering a period where global supply chains are uncertain, and we see the economic crisis rising, this single policy of the Dutch government is about the stupidest thing one can do.
Utterly extraordinary. I saw that a new political party, the Farmers' Party, has been set up, and that they're polling rather well if there was an election called, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah. Yes, that's incredible. They're called the Farmer Citizens Movement, and in my view, they are a typical controlled opposition. So I'm very suspicious about them, but it is definitely true that they are promoted by the media and they are presented as the voice of normal people. But I'm afraid I don't trust them at all. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a leader of a different party, but I genuinely think that most of them will, at the end of the day, rather like the Tories not being willing to perform Brexit, they will back down. I think they're more interested in being part of the establishment than in really being in opposition.
And what's fascinating also, Chair, is that it's not just in the Netherlands. There's cost of living protests going on, for example, in Italy. Again, not mentioned in the press at all. We've obviously seen the economic collapse in Sri Lanka. And yet, it feels to me that the governments are just sort of just resolutely carrying on with their complete obsession with net zero and just ignoring the people and the consequences.
Yes, it's almost like they're being controlled from above, isn't it?
Well, it's so worrying, but ultimately, the ballot box is the place to change this.
But we've seen in the United States that massive election fraud is possible in broad daylight. So,
well, yes, that's another whole different ballgame. But it's interesting. And so you run a party. Is your party explicitly against the net zero targets?
Yes, we are climate skeptics, as they say. So I do not believe in the man-made global warming thesis. I think the climate has always changed. In the Middle Ages, it was a little bit hotter on Earth, and then it became a little bit colder, and so on. So there's been always in flux. And even if one were to believe that carbon dioxide is causing the climate to change a little bit, then adaptation to this changing climate would be a far more rational policy than reducing it entirely and destroying our economies.
Thierry, I agree entirely. Our ability to react and adapt to it, there are many factors in climate change. Of course, climate change has been with us since time began and will be with us until
absolutely
for the future of time. Thierry, we'll have you back on because I have a section on this show called Climate Sanity. We have to talk about this. I'm so grateful to Thierry Baudet, the leader of Forum for Democracy from the Netherlands, because we need to be able to talk about this. That is absolutely essential. Before we go to the break, I think I've just got time to go to Derby, where Tim is on the line. Morning, Tim.
Morning, Richard.
What's on your mind?
Just basically watching your programme, and I totally agree with you and John Redwood. What a team Rees-Mogg, David Davis would make. The trouble is they can't throw their hat in, but anyway. But and Richie and Don Hodges, they don't seem to be able to think out the box. They don't seem to be able to think they can cut taxes and drag government spending back into line.
That's right. I mean, if you cut wasteful spending, you take the money out of the economy, that side of the coin, whilst giving tax cuts to ordinary individuals.
Absolutely. I don't know. I mean, we've all known for years and years that there's that much waste in public spending. It's just ridiculous. It's about time somebody got to grips with it. I mean, half the crisis was caused by Hancock and Ritchie when they gave away all that money on ridiculous app schemes and furlough. Not saying the furlough scheme was that bad, but the amount of money they gave away, probably illegally, that was claimed illegally, should be looked into. If they dragged some of that back, they wouldn't have to cut taxes.
Well, that's right.
I mean?
And of course, there was actually a government minister from the House of Lords, Lord Agnew, who resigned because he was so concerned at the complete lack of interest by the Treasury Anti-Fraud Department and lack of expertise in going after the huge amount of fraud and corruption that was involved.
Absolutely, and then that should be one of their aims, is to go back and look at this and consider, prosecution, and, well, give them an amnesty first and say, well, if you have illegally claimed for this, this and this, we'll give you an amnesty to give the money back. If you don't, we'll investigate.
Fascinating. Well, Tim, thank you very much for your thoughts. That's Tim in Derby with his concerns about essentially the money that Rishi gave away, the lack of interest in to actually recover that. Lots of messages pouring in. We've got one here from Sue, who says, as a lifelong Conservative voter, I've reached the conclusion proportional representation is the only sensible way forward. That is great. Thank you for that, Sue. And another one here from Charles in Cardiff. Morning, Richard. Radical change in tax is needed. Too complicated. It should be set at one rate and the revenue used for just 4 things. Fascinating. Goes on a bit. I might come back to that. And another one from Mark, they're just pouring in here, who says that Rishi Sunak couldn't answer the question what a woman is, the question about what a woman is, either when Julia Hartley-Brewer asked him. I hadn't seen that. That's interesting. We'll come back to that. We're taking your calls and messages after the break because people are talking about what's in their manifesto. I've given my thoughts here on Tice Talk on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here in the second hour on my show here on Talk TV, the home of common sense. And on my leadership game, my game of snakes and ladders, let me tell you, the people who are rising up the leadership ladder without question, without any question at all, are the likes of Suella Braverman and also Penny Mordaunt. Some concerns about why she can't properly, logically define a woman, but nevertheless, lots of enthusiasm for the way that she took on the Labour Party in the House of Commons. I have to say, the person who is sliding and slithering down the snake on my snakes and ladder board, without question, is Rishi Sunak. He's the favourite, I think, at the moment, but there's not been a single message of support for him in an hour and 20 minutes on the show so far. A lot of support for John Redwood, actually, who was my previous guest, for Chancellor of the Exchequer. I've just sent him a message. That would be, I think that actually really would be good. That would be someone who understands the balance sheet and the finances and who would take on the Treasury. Meanwhile, lots of thanks also for talking about the Netherlands, which is an important other issue. Let's head, though, to South Wales, Cwmbran, where Dale is on the line. Morning, Dale.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm tremendous. I'm tremendous. How's life down in Cwmbran?
Oh, it's very sunny at the moment, lovely and warm.
Oh, that's marvellous. Isn't it always sunny in Cwmbran?
Not usually, no.
Not usually.
Oh, you cross the Severn Bridge and that's the end of it. It's
I'm quite
rain all the way.
Yeah, I know. I've been there quite a few times. What's on your mind this morning, Dale?
It's a manifesto, to be honest. You know, I think we just should get what we voted for. You know, get Brexit done. Northern Ireland Treaty is a disaster. You know, the fishing policy, again, it's another disaster. You know, take back control. Our borders, our waters. You know, definitely.
Quite right. So, in a sense, therefore, you're sort of sad to see Boris blow such a great opportunity.
He had it on a plate, didn't he? He had the backing, he had the mandate, he had everything, and he bottled it.
Yeah, it is a tragedy with that level of that huge mandate, that 80-seat majority. For me, the reason I actually feel that he blew it so much was that he didn't surround himself in his first cabinet with really high-quality people, the likes that we've been talking about earlier, the Redwoods, the Duncan Smith, the David Davis, really high-quality people.
They were wishy-washy.
Well, he had sort of wishy-washy people, almost deliberately, people who were sort of yes men and women who would sort of just do as he said without actually having the experience and the wisdom to do a great job. You know, it's like when you run a business, Dale, if you're the boss, you actually want really good people underneath you who are sort of better than you, who then make you look good, make the business do well, and everybody's happy.
You want people to think for themselves as well.
That's right.
You don't want puppets.
So who would you vote for? Or perhaps you are a Conservative member.
Actually, I'm a Labour Party member.
You're a Labour Party member. If you were a Conservative member, who's your current favourite with 9 declared so far?
Penny Mordaunt at the moment.
Penny Mordaunt. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. So that's interesting. And why? Why, Dale?
I think because she talks sense. When you talk to her, you get a sense that she's telling the truth. Some people, you know, they're lying.
So do you agree with her views that a trans woman is a female?
No, on that, I'm sorry, I don't, because, you know, you get these trans men now, they take part in swimming. That's wrong.
Yeah, I think that's...
On that, I disagree with her, but most of what she says, I do agree.
Interesting. Well, I think that will be the thing that she's got to sort out. If she sorts that out, then she's a really, really serious contender. Dale, thank you so much from Cwmbran. We're going to head from South Wales up north to Bolton, where I hope it's also sunny. I love Bolton. Hi, Matthew.
Yeah, afternoon, Richard. Yeah, nice and sunny up in the north as well.
Excellent. Still good morning so far, I hope. Otherwise, I've lost an hour. But anyway, what's in your manifesto this morning, Matthew?
Yeah, it is. We're still in the morning. What I'm not hearing from any of these people who've thrown their hats in the rings for the leadership is change. We're going to get... A previous caller said it about half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago. We're just going to get more of the same. There's going to be lots of bashing one another, during the campaign, and what for? To carry on as we are, but with a different person at the helm.
Although in fairness, actually, in fairness, Matthew, quite a lot of them are talking about a very different direction of travel on tax cuts. Certainly Kemi Badenoch is talking about her concerns about net zero. These are things that essentially Boris's government weren't talking about.
I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, Richard. I'm talking about the two-party system we've got.
Ah, OK, right, I'm with you on that, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's, Einstein's take on insanity, keep doing the same thing over and over, you get the same result.
No, you're quite right, and
that's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing under the current two-party system with first past the post. The good news, I have to say to you, Matthew, I knock on a lot of doors, and more people realise that something's got to change, and actually, I think the issue of proportional representation is massively rising up the scale of people's interests and concerns. I think it's changing. I think you'd be surprised, Matthew. Within 3 years, I think we could have it here in the UK. I'm optimistic.
I hope so. Richard, the other thing is, like myself, I don't have anyone to vote for. Like many of your callers have said today, I don't have an option to vote. I don't want to vote Tory and I don't want to vote Labour. So, although there's a chance of reform, I don't know if they're standing...
We'll be standing 600 candidates, and so, you know, the option will be there, but obviously, as we've touched on before, first past the post is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And that's why it needs to change, because competition's a good thing. And if you've got, in a sense, in any walk of life, if you've got new folk with new ideas, disruptive ideas, that makes everybody perform a bit better.
It's a bit like buying tea, Richard. You know, if they don't have Tetley or PG in the supermarket, I don't go for the brand with sawdust in. I go somewhere else, or I hold fire. I'm not forced into buying something if I don't want to. And with this two-party system, it's like you're forced to vote one or the other.
That's right. No, it's a really good point. So you wouldn't fancy a bit of Yorkshire tea, which I quite like.
Not being a Lancastrian, no, I'd go for Lancashire tea, Richard.
Very, very good, Matthew. I love it. Absolutely priceless. So, who's of the candidates so far, though? Put your money where your mouth is. Who's your favourite so far?
Yeah, not wishy-washy. I've already spoke to Talk Radio last week. I'd have a wildcard entry of a dream team tag of Sir Mike Graham and Kevin O'Sullivan. I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, they're not going to be on the ballot paper there. That's the issue, Matthew. Thank you very much for your call. There we are. I'll let Mike know that he's got one vote if he wants it. That was Matthew from Bolton. He's not impressed with the current two-party system. He's not impressed with Rishi, ready for Rishi. He's definitely not ready for Rishi. That is absolutely certain. Lots of messages coming in here. We've got one here that says, if we've learnt anything from the past few years, our politicians have zero regard for the population they serve. They only want to get in and do what they want. The Brexit vote isn't done, and immigration is even worse. So there we are. Another one here from Testament who says, you mentioned we can't give our opinion about net zero via our vote, but we can't, and that's absolutely right at the moment, because all the parties at Westminster the last election were pro net zero. That will change at the next general election. Trust me. Lots of messages here. Another message here. This is important. Sadly, Penny Mordaunt has unfortunately blown it for many people. She has to revisit her view on the transgender issue. For some people, that's not negotiable. That's from Matt in Newcastle. Stay with us. Coming up, we've got to talk about the new Met Police Commissioner. Is he going to be any good? Is he going to be up to the job? Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is Talk TV. I think my most memorable and proudest moment in journalism over all these years is actually being on air during the lockdowns, even when I had COVID myself. Over the last 2 years, getting people to tell their stories, not just about people who lost loved ones to COVID, but people who lost their fundamental freedoms, their children's schooling, their mental health, their physical health, their businesses, and giving people a chance to tell their stories about how it affected them.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Nadira Tudor. The number of contenders in the running for Conservative Party leader has gone up to 9 as Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt joined the race. She made the announcement via video on social media. Taxes and whether or not to cut them is emerging as a focal point of the race. Professor Sir John Curtis from the University of Strathclyde says candidates need to ask themselves this key question.
Can you think creatively about how to run the economy in the circumstances in which we find ourselves, which are very difficult circumstances, rather than necessarily hanging on to the comfort blanket of what you thought would usually be best for the economy?
According to the Mail on Sunday, Liz Truss will also put herself forward pledging to reverse former Chancellor Rishi Sunak's health tax levy. Conservative MP Julian Knight told Times Radio why he's backing Miss Truss.
Well, I have personal experience with Liz. I've worked with her for a number of years. I find her, she's warm, she's a sense of humour, she's non-factional. She's also the longest-serving cabinet minister, and I think she has broad appeal across the party.
At least 6 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears that more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. Novak Djokovic says mental strength may be more important going into today's Wimbledon men's final against Nick Kyrgios. Djokovic is going for a 4th consecutive title win at SW19, while Kyrgios is going for his first Grand Slam title. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are planning to attend. Parts of the UK could see temperatures pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius today as a heat health alert has been issued for most of the country. The heat wave is likely to last into next week, with temperatures set to soar above 32 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are here in the second hour of the show. Messages pouring in about people's manifestos, their leadership preferences, because obviously my snakes and ladders competition, who's going up the ladder, who's going down the snakes. And at the moment, I have to say, Sunak has gone from the very top. He has tumbled down the snake, and he is now at the bottom of my leaderboard, based on people's views. Rising up the board is Penny Mordaunt and also Suella Braverman. But keep those thoughts and views coming in. Meanwhile, another big announcement this week hardly got a mention because of what's going on with politics, because there has been a new appointment as the Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police. Sir Mark Rowley has been announced as the force's new leader. He's 57. He served as head of the Met Police's counter-terrorism unit between 2014 and 18 before leaving to go into the private sector. So he's been tempted back by the biggest police job in the land. It's taken about 4 or 5 months to select a new leader, and that's, in a sense, fine as long as they've found the right person. Well, I want to know if that is the right person, and there's no one better to talk about this than former Scotland Yard detective Peter Blexley, who's with me now on the line. Peter, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us here on Talk TV. So, Peter, we've touched on this before. This is a really significant moment for Londoners, indeed for everybody, really, in the most important policing role there is. So, Mark Rowley, does he have your support? Are you thrilled?
Well, I hope it's significant for Londoners for all the right reasons. There are some more bad news stories coming down the line about the Met, and he will have to deal with those, even though they originated whilst he wasn't even in the organisation. He's talking a good game, as you would expect, although there are concerns for me about what he said, particularly around data and technology, because we were sold this lie many years ago, even when I was in service, that data and technology was going to cure all ills and that clever algorithms would predict where crime was going to take place and we'd all live in some kind of low-crime nirvana. Of course, we all know that hasn't turned out to be the case.
That's right. So, in a sense, you're prepared. Do you know him out of interest? Did you come across him, or got friends who know Sir Mark Rowley?
No, I don't know him, and this might be a strength for him because he's not Met Police born and bred, so to speak. He spent a lot of his career in other forces. He was formerly the Chief Constable of Surrey. So when he comes in, having been out of policing for about 5 years now, perhaps he won't be so, shall we say, reluctant to clear the table, to get new blood in, to make the reforms that clearly need to be made, to get the changes at the top that need to be made, because this lot, in terms of the senior management team at Scotland Yard, have performed so appallingly that the organisation is now in special measures. So anybody can see that deep-rooted reform is needed.
That's really interesting, and that's a good point. Because he's been out for 4 or 5 years, hopefully he's had that sort of broader perspective and that private sector experience to realise that deep reform is needed. As you mentioned, I mean, special measures, it couldn't be more serious than that. I think there are 6 forces across the country in special measures. He's come up with a 100-day plan, apparently, and as you say, he talks a good game, talking about getting more police back on the street, but he authored or co-authored a report recently where he wasn't that impressed, I think, with stop and search. He felt there was disproportionate stop and search. What are your thoughts on that, Peter?
Well, of course, stop and search, which is a hugely powerful tool that the police must not be denied, has been a prickly subject for decades. We can rewind 40 years to the Brixton riots of 1981, which was largely blamed on disproportionate and poorly carried out stop and search operation that was called Operation Swamp. So they've had decades to get this right, and they've manifestly failed to do it. It must not be stripped away from the police, because I can guarantee you that as we're speaking here this morning, somebody in the UK will be stopped, being searched and being arrested for carrying a weapon or some other kind of contraband. We need the police to still do it, but they've got to get it right in terms of how they do it.
That's right. And are you hopeful when he says he wants to get back to sort of neighbourhood policing and get bobbies back on the beat? Do you think that's just talk, or do you think he might actually walk the walk, literally?
Neighbourhood policing is central and is core to policing by consent. I'm sure that I speak for millions of us, the length and breadth of the UK, when we say we actually like to see a police officer walking down our streets. It creates reassurance. It makes people think that the police are there for us, particularly if they have the time to stop and talk and tell us what crime was committed in our neighbourhood recently, so that we can take steps so that we don't become a victim of crime ourselves, so that officers can hear from those wonderful curtain-twitching people who know what's going on, who can give the police valuable information, not only on a local basis, but sometimes information that is so serious that it needs to be upscaled to other specialist squads. Neighbourhood policing is core, and we need a lot more of it.
So, Peter, and you know, you say all of this and it sounds absolutely right. If Sir Mark Rowley's just come back from the private sector, do you think he might be able to tempt, other experienced senior police officers back into the force under new leadership with a new direction? I mean, maybe you should be coming back into the game, Peter, to sort of show people how it's done, get the job sorted.
I'm afraid my potty mouth, which frequently pops up on social media, means that I would never be asked back into the public sector in any way, shape or form. But it doesn't necessarily need senior police officers to return. What has happened in recent years is that many, many disillusioned, hugely experienced cops have left the service. And they could be of lowly rank detectives like I was, or uniform officers. But they'll only come back if they feel valued, if they feel supported, and that they're not going to get thrown under the bus by some promotion-seeking senior officer who's trying to climb that greasy pole. Yes, there's a wealth of experience out there, much of it operating now in the private sector, and the public would be very well served by getting some of that experience back into the service.
It's fascinating because actually the same story is true in the NHS with healthcare. There's so many people who left the NHS because they couldn't cope with the way it was run and managed, has sort of wasted to the country, and it sounds like there are lots of former police officers likewise.
Oh, absolutely, and let's not duck the thorny issue of pay and pensions, so much of which has been butchered in recent years. That makes the job less attractive. If you join the police service, in all likelihood, you're never going to get rich, and you won't be roundly popular. But part of the payoff is that after you've done 30 years or so of dedicated public service, you get a decent pension to give you some comfort in your later years. They've been chipped away. They need to be restored.
And just finally, Peter, just quickly, who amongst the candidates so far to be Prime Minister, leader of the Tory party, who do you think will be tough on crime and give the police the support they need?
Well, tough on crime and that kind of language is not always what is needed. Cerebral, man of the people, woman of the people, connection with the public, serving their needs, that's what's needed. And I hope the next leader of the Tory party will deliver exactly that.
Go on, give us a name, Peter. Don't be shy.
I'm afraid with my political leanings, Mr. Tice, I would probably be the worst person you could have on your show today to nominate a leader.
Oh, very
Please
good.
forgive me for ducking a question.
There we are. At the last minute, the brave Peter Blexley has ducked the key question. Not to worry, Peter, thank you so much for coming on my show, former Scotland Yard detective, with his views on the Met Police Commissioner. Stay with us, we'll take your calls. It's Tice Talk, it's Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are well through the second hour, heading towards noon. And, of course, after my show, we've then got the wonderful, the amazing Trisha Goddard from 1 till 4. And then after that, we've got, he's back, Kevin O'Sullivan, fresh from his show last night with Mike O'Graham. Kevin has got his show from 4 till 7. And then we have Mark Saggers. Don't go anywhere for that this afternoon. The messages keep pouring in. We've got one here from Lawrence, who says, I'm amazed you haven't mentioned the staggering cost of having to pay for the upkeep of tens of thousands of the illegal migrants. It is a huge, huge cost. It's billions of pounds a year, and it's one of the reasons I think actually people are very concerned that this Tory government have failed to deal with the issue, which actually links into Rishi's message, who says, I've been in the construction industry, I've seen the wasted money by councils firsthand, 6 people doing a 2-man job, etc., etc. So top of his manifesto would be to clean up the wasted money. It would be billions. Well, when I talked about it a couple of weeks back, I said, actually, you know, that if you cut £5 in every 100, in the same way that we're doing with our household budgets, well, if you did that with the government, all of a sudden, you're talking about £55 billion. That's real money, real cash. I agree with you, Richie. We need to get on to that. Let's go to Gateshead, where Jim is on the line. Hi, Jim.
Hiya, how are you?
Tremendous. What's on your manifesto? I know you've always got a view, Jim.
Yeah, well, the thing is, when I heard Boris Johnson falling, I did hope he'd hang on, Richard, because his Red Wall voter, I voted for him, not the Conservative Party, because I thought he'd get Brexit done. The Conservative parties are going to reap what they sow in the future. I think they've shot themselves in the foot because, again, the Westminster bubble is thinking that Brexit's finished and all the rest of it. But it's not, because the Northern Red Wall will move away from the Conservative Party. They will not go back to Labour. We're going to come in with a proportional representation, and the Tories have finished themselves. We're not living in a democracy when you've got the likes of John Major and Heseltine saying that we should select the leader, then put it to the party membership. That's not democracy. That's putting in a puppet.
Interesting. So, do you think that Boris should have stayed then? You're sad to see him go?
I was sad to see him go for Brexit, Richard, but then when I sat back and looked at it, I thought what we need now is a complete Brexiteer to get it done, because, can I just say something on subject? Like, people go on about Brexit bonuses and how the country's suffering. Well, I'm seeing it every day, little Brexit bonuses. For the first time in 30 years, I've seen Bricky's labourers' jobs advertised for our people to permanent jobs with pensions and holiday pay and sick pay instead of important.
That's a great example, Jim. That's really good. That's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, manufacturing apprenticeships advertised for the first time in 20-odd years to be permanent jobs with pensions and sick pay and holiday pay, not important in cheap labour. I've seen my son's wages rise.
Jim, you're so right. That is such a brilliant example. And likewise, lorry driver wages going up for the first time properly in a decade or so. I mean, that for me was one of the key things, that we hadn't seen any real wage growth for the lower paid, and I think that's a massive Brexit bonus that is starting to come through.
But we also need with fisheries. I mean, this thing with the migrants coming across, instead of sending the French money, just say, we're going to cut your fishing licences. We've got the power to do that. Just say, you're going to get less fishing licences unless you sort this out. To be honest, we shouldn't be giving them anyway. We should be getting with stock built up. Actually, I've seen apprenticeships for shipbuilders in North Shields, like engine fitters and such. Like, people are gearing up around the country, ready to reinvigorate coastal towns that have been decimated.
That's right, Jim. Thank you so much for those thoughts. That's Jim in Gateshead. He is happy about some of the Brexit bonuses. I think we'd all agree that there's a lot more to done. Let's do Brexit properly, for heaven's sake. It's like anything, any job. If you're going to do it properly. Meanwhile, Wilkes World clearly doesn't think I'm doing this job properly, because Wilkes says, sadly, Richard, you're just another same old politician, another man in a grey suit. Nigel Farage is not. Well, the truth is I'm not actually in a suit. I've got a blue jacket and some sort of beige trousers. But anyway, Wilkes, thanks very much for listening and for your thoughts and views. Meanwhile, here's another unhappy person with me, Faye Van Dunk, who says, Richard, what a shame you gave so little airtime to your Dutch politician guest, as people need to know the latest land grab is World Economic Forum driven and is coming here. Well, I think actually, in fairness, I wonder how many other people over the whole of this weekend across any of the broadcast media in the United Kingdom are giving any time to anybody in the Netherlands. So, and in a sense, it's a show. I gave him about 7 or 8 minutes, and I'm very pleased to have done so, and we will get more people on to talk about what's going on, because that is one of the first examples of real people protest against the cost, the impact of obsessive net zero policies. Anyway, let's head up from there to Durham, where Sean's on the line. Hi, Sean.
How are you doing, Richard?
I'm all right, I'm all right. Taking a bit of flack here.
Can I start off with saying typical Labour backstabber you've just had on there, mate? I cannot stand these backstabbers that turn around. Now they're complaining. Stop complaining. It was your fault to put the Tories in the first place, mate. I'm Labour through and through.
Right.
Right? I would never vote for this Tory half-witted Tory party.
Keep it clean, it's a family show, Sean.
I know. But at the end of the day, mate, the Labour backstabbers have only got themselves to blame.
Yeah, interesting. So, so therefore, maybe you don't care who's the next leader of the Conservative Party.
No, I don't trust any of them.
No, that's actually corrupt. That's a really interesting point, that you don't trust them, because far too often, and we saw it with Boris Johnson, he said one thing in the manifesto and then didn't deliver on it. But how
the wasted £42 billion. That's good. There's got to be an inquiry into that. How many back pockets of the Conservative MPs got that money?
So, Sean, do you trust?
They're corrupt, man.
Do you trust, Sean, Keir Starmer, if he was Prime Minister?
I tell you what, I'd rather have Keir Starmer than this trash that we've got in now, mind.
Okay, so you would trust him, and were you a Brexiteer, Sean, or were you voted to remain?
I voted Brexit, mate. You voted I voted Brexit because of the lies, mate.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, it's the biggest mistake I've ever done in my life. I'm not a backstabber, never will be. I'm a Labour supporter, mate.
Interesting. So actually, do you feel that therefore, for you, Brexit hasn't delivered any benefits, or what?
Not at all. It's the worst thing this country's ever done, man.
Interesting, Sean. See, for me, it's a platform of opportunity. But Boris's main failing was that having secured that independence, he hasn't taken advantage of it. It was the right thing to do. I don't think you should regret it, but I think we've just got to be patient, because we've got to make sure you get the benefits of it.
He shouldn't be he should be kicked out, man. Where's the removal vans?
Well, they'll be coming soon, Sean. They'll be coming soon. It depends how quickly they get on with it.
He wants to get on the phone to the removal van that the Chancellor got. He probably hasn't got a house to go to.
Well,
sleep on the streets.
Who knows, Sean? So, but bottom line is, you would trust Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner to do a great job, would you?
I would trust Labour with my life, mate.
Oh, would you? There we are.
I'm no backstabber.
All right.
I'm no backstabber.
You're no
mate.
backstabber, Sean. There we go. Thank you very much for your call. That's Sean in Durham. He thinks that, he's not really interested in who replaces Boris Johnson. He doesn't like them. He is Labour through and through, and he would trust Keir Starmer. Well, that's good to hear. That's one who does trust Keir Starmer. So let's see what else is coming in there. We've got one who, John, he says, well said, Jim in Gateshead. Wonderful variety of views here. Sean didn't like what Jim said, but there we go. Jim says, I need to take the gloves off more. John says that. Richard, well, I think there are times when I do, but equally it's important to listen to a broad range of views, and those who think I'm doing a good job, that's fine. And there's one here that says Richard Tice for PM, but then equally the previous ones I read out think that I'm just same old, same old. It's hard to know, really. Anyway, meanwhile, Pablo's come back in, talking about climate, and I will always talk about climate and climate sanity. And Pablo says the latest report by the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change in 2021, that report was an epic failure. I think I've got real concerns about that. I'm one of the people who has read far too much of it for my own sanity anyway. But there we go. So we've got more messages here coming on. Richard, I was talking about energy restrictions coming on Mike's show in the week coming here. Yeah, I am concerned about energy, and we're going to be talking about that in the third hour of this show, because already there is talk in Germany of energy rationing, literally rationing energy use domestically, in businesses, in schools, in order to reduce the quantity of energy being used. And as I see that this is coming here, I know businesses who are already being contacted by the government to say, we would pay you essentially a retainer if during the week when you're open for business, that actually you would shut down parts of your business to reduce energy usage. I can see that coming. if there is an energy crisis. And that all depends what happens, of course, with global energy prices, global gas prices, and the war in Ukraine. You just got to look at the spike in energy prices in Germany. It's gone absolutely through the roof. Their situation is different because they're more dependent on Russian gas. But that's what's happening. If Germany gets cut off from Russian gas, they're going to be scrabbling for gas everywhere else, which means there's going to be a greater shortage. You know what that means to the price. The price will go through the roof, and there will genuinely be a shortage of supply. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your thoughts, your views. Here we are. We've got one here from Nigel who says about Sean, typical Labour voter, wouldn't be able to substantiate anything he says. Well, there we are. Sean, I think, was concerned. He voted Brexit, but there we are. Wilkes has come back at me. Sorry, Richard, I was trying to say we've got the same grey old politicians we need. People are telling you they want different. Well, luckily at the moment, I'm not grey. That may change with everything that's going on, but at the moment, I promise you my hair colour is genuine. There's no hair colouring in here whatsoever. I'm not going to tell you what I would do if my hair did grow grey, but there we go. Keep those calls coming. After the break, we're going to be talking to Professor Gordon Hughes, the Professor of Political Economy at the University Edinburgh, about energy prices, because I've got bad news, folks. They're going north, not south. Stay with us at the home of common sense. It's Tice Talk here at Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. Thanks for listening.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 12.
Good afternoon, I'm Nadira Tudor. The number of contenders in the running for Conservative Party leader has gone up to 9 as Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt joined the race. Taxes and whether or not to cut them is emerging as a focal point, and there are warnings from Tory grandees that the party is ripping itself apart as they call for an end to toxicity. But speaking to Times Radio, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who's in the running, pledged to keep his campaign clean.
I've spoken to all the other, I think now every other candidate in this campaign and said, the way I will fight this is I'm just not interested in talking about personalities or anything. Let's just talk about the policies, and we can disagree on the emphasis or the detail. That's fine, but actually in the end, we're all Conservatives and we all want what's best for the country.
It follows the Boris Johnson's resignation this week, and there are now calls for an immediate investigation into claims he lobbied for a young woman to get a City Hall job whilst he was London Mayor. The Sunday Times has reported there were allegations Mr Johnson advocated for a role for her in 2008, just weeks after they met. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper told Times Radio these allegations show that the Prime Minister needs to leave Downing Street immediately.
These are really serious allegations. These allegations about abuse of power at a time when Boris Johnson was the Mayor of London, but also raises questions about other potential abuses of power, about whether this has happened on other occasions, and also about the way that he has dealt with similar scandals since he's been Prime Minister.
At least 6 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. It says the Royal Air Force has sent 6 fighter jets to Finland and Sweden for joint training exercises. It comes just weeks after the 2 countries applied to join NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and is part of an increased presence in the region. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced he'll be stepping down this week after protesters stormed his official residence and set the Prime Minister's house on fire. The PM and President were not in the buildings at the time. And the Duchess of Cornwall has revealed she can get nervous before high-profile events. Camilla's told a documentary due to be broadcast this week that she just takes a deep breath and gets on with it. Those are the latest news headlines. Still to come, your Talk Sport update, but first, your weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
It will be a dry and fine afternoon across the UK with plenty of sunshine, though this may become hazy later on this afternoon, particularly across the north and west. Across Scotland, low cloud will start to build in across the far north and west late this afternoon and into the early evening. Elsewhere across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, there'll be plenty of lengthy sunny periods throughout the afternoon and into the evening. Across Northern Wales, there'll be some patchy cloud around at times, though here and elsewhere across Wales and central England, there'll still be plenty of sunny spells. Very warm for South Wales and England. The fine and hot weather continues across southern England and the Channel Isles, with plenty of sunshine around to the end of the day. Low cloud will affect the northwest tonight, though elsewhere there'll be plenty of clear spells. A warm night ahead.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
Novak Djokovic is taking on Nick Kyrgios in the Wimbledon men's final this afternoon. The Serbian world number 3 is aiming for a 4th consecutive Wimbledon title and his 21st Grand Slam. Meanwhile, Kyrgios is bidding for his first major singles trophy. Formula One has issued a statement saying they're taking reports of racist and sexist abuse in the crowd at this weekend's Austrian Grand Prix very seriously. This follows reports of racial abuse and female fans receiving verbal and physical abuse from male spectators. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton has criticised fans for cheering after his crash during the qualifier, calling the reaction mind-blowing. Hamilton went off close to grandstands filled with fans of his rival Max Verstappen. He'll start 8th on the grid later. British boxer Derek Chisora has beaten Kubrat Pulev on a split decision after a close heavyweight encounter in London last night. The victory ended the 38-year-old's run of 3 consecutive defeats. And Chelsea's deal to sign Raheem Sterling for nearly £50 million has edged closer. The 27-year-old is set to arrive at Stamford Bridge on a 5-year contract. Chelsea hope the deal is completed in time for the England forward to join the pre-season tour in the US. That's all for now. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
I think the topic that I'd like more people to be thinking about is definitely health and social care. You know, we have an outrageous system where we don't look after our elderly in the way we should. We've got to have a proper grown-up and honest conversation about that.
Welcome back and good afternoon. Yes, we have cruised into the third hour of Tice Talk this Sunday, and so much going on, so many messages pouring in. Mike says David Davis is another good shout in respect of the leader. Still think also, Mike thinks that Johnny Mercer would be a great PM too. Well, he's not standing, he's got time for Mordaunt, so Mike's got time for lots of people. Now, this is a key point. Thinks a military leader is needed. And, of course, Tom Tugendhat was in the military once. I was slightly disappointed. I did ask him onto the show. He didn't have the courtesy of even replying, let alone saying whether he's busy or not. But he has said elsewhere this morning, when he was asked what's the naughtiest thing he did, he said, well, I've invaded a country once, which is actually quite funny. He's also shown, he's got some very complicated charts showing that he's more popular in swing seats and former Labour seats than other candidates. The graph is so complicated it's hard to understand, but there we go. Lots of other tweets, one here about Kemi Badenoch coming in. Kemi Badenoch is the only one talking about net zero, her concerns about the cost of it. And I think that is massively to her credit, because the cost of energy is going through the roof. We're putting on the screen in the next minute or so where that cost is going, because there's already calculations done by an organisation called Cornwall Insight, which shows that the current forecast for October, which was due to be £2,800 per household as a sort of average. That was the Ofgem expectation. They're now saying that could be over £3,200, another £400 in October. And I'm delighted now this afternoon to be joined by Professor Gordon Hughes, former Professor of Political Economy at the University of Edinburgh, who is an expert in all matters energy, pricing, with the impact of what causes those price rises. Gordon, a very good afternoon. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. So, yet again, more news on energy prices and not good news. It looks like the calculation is they're going further north, not south, Gordon. Why is this?
It's because of the way in which the prices are set. The arrangement is that the caps on prices go up nowadays every 3 months with effect from October, based on what the prices were in either the previous 3 or 6 months. We're just moving from a 6-month to a 3-month adjustment, so it's slightly awkward. Cornwall Insight have basically noted that the reference prices this summer are really pretty high and are tending to go up rather than down, which is why these forecasts are being revised upwards. And indeed, they also believe that they're likely to go up in January yet again, though not by as much.
And that's based on the current level of prices and their forecasts. And I guess one of the greater concerns is that if the war in Ukraine continues to go on, there's a greater push to reduce dependency on Russian gas across Europe. That increases the demand for other gas elsewhere, that actually prices could keep going north. And therefore, I think the January next year forecast of another 200 or 300 quid, over 3,400, that could go north again.
Indeed. The problem that we face is that this squeeze on gas prices started a few months ago before Ukraine. Ukraine has made it worse, but it was built into the system for a considerable time, and there's no likelihood of that reversing quickly. There are sort of promises that more gas will be delivered to Europe, but none of that is going to happen in the next 6 or 12 months. And if you look forward in time, the forecasts for this time next year, and indeed the winter of 23-24 look in some senses even worse. So there's not likely to be any good news coming for a considerable time.
So I guess the key question, and I'm starting to really focus on this, Gordon, now, is it's important that the government, in a sense, starts preparations now, because we're seeing in Germany, not only, I mean, the German price of electricity is like climbing the Eiger or Mount Everest. It's just gone completely vertical. But they're also talking about actual energy rationing for both domestically and for businesses to reduce the use, and so you've got a double or a triple whammy. How concerned are you that if things go badly around the world, and we have to prepare for the worst in a sense, Gordon, that we may face energy rationing here in the United Kingdom?
I think that's relatively unlikely. The thing in Germany is that they face a choice which is constrained by their pipeline capacity. They're a very large gas consumer. They rely very heavily on gas coming from Russia and from Norway as the two principal suppliers. And the consequence of that is that there's very few choices for them. And they, on the other hand, have very large amount of industry, which is dependent on gas. And they don't want to sacrifice employment in order to maintain domestic supply.
Understood, but if the supply reduces, they're going to be bidding for gas from Qatar or from the US in the same way that we are, because we're importing a huge amount of gas. So that's going to send the price even further, and we're all going to get into a bidding war, and I can see genuine shortages of global gas.
I don't think there is a lot of belief that there is a global shortage of gas. The problem is that Germany is being played by Russia. What Russia is doing is reduce the amount of gas that can be put into storage for winter. So the issue is that at that point, next winter, they find themselves very short of reserve supplies of gas. We rely primarily on LNG as our reserve, and that flows more freely. So that I think we'll pay in the form of high prices rather than the likelihood of rationing. And I'm pretty sure National Grid, which at the moment runs the gas system, believes the same way.
So, in a way, that's encouraging that you're not concerned about the availability of supply. Slightly reassuring, but I think it's right to be prepared on the downside. But we've got to do something about the price, Gordon. And at the moment, the government's agenda has been to build more renewables, which means more subsidies and ever-rising price rises. I've been promoting shale gas. There is a report sitting on the desk of the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, that I suspect may not see the light of day during this leadership contest. I mean, shale gas won't change things overnight, but a clear steer that they're going to do it would be a real positive step for the 3 to 5 year duration, wouldn't it?
It would indeed. Renewables are being touted as being capable of bringing down the price, but that's just nonsense. It'll have marginal effects, if any, for the next 5 years. The issue for the UK is a need to change what is seen as being the environment for developing our existing resources. And that's not just shale gas, that's also what remains in the North Sea, the incentives to invest in building up production, because you only maintain oil and gas production by continuous investment. And there's been very little investment because there's been very little incentive and a great deal of hostility to the industry. That is fundamentally what needs to change. As you say, it'll take 3 years plus to make a big difference, but it will make a difference and it'll very much change expectations.
And that's a good thing. I guess, finally, Gordon, the question is what you think the government should do between now and in 3 years' time, because it looks like the sort of the proposals that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, put forward when he was dealing with a forecast of £2,800, if that forecast is now shooting up, then, in a sense, they're going to have to keep doing more and more, aren't they? Otherwise, otherwise we will see civil protests.
Yes, the cost of living crisis linked to energy prices is real. And there are a variety of ways of getting around that. But the problem in part is that we're worse off. We can't avoid being worse off. It's a question of how that's distributed. At the moment, it's just all borne by those people who are most dependent on energy simply because they live in cold parts of the country or they live in historic old buildings which can't be insulated.
That's right. Fascinating.
And, I mean, overall, there needs to be both a medium-term strategy, as we've discussed, and there needs to be a short-term strategy to essentially moderate the shock that people face in terms of on their living standards and on energy poverty, which is a major problem.
It's a major issue, Gordon. Thank you so much indeed. Well, Gordon just finished. G has just tweeted, in the UK needs more gas, not less. We need to secure national security. It's time to stop the stupidity and open up more offshore oil fields and shale gas. I think we agree with that. Gordon, thank you so much indeed. That was Professor Gordon Hughes, former professor at the University of Edinburgh. This is a massive issue. I will keep talking about it. I think it's potentially, between now and the end of the year, could become the most important issue that drives the cost of living crisis. There's only one candidate at the moment that seems to be talking about it, Kemi Badenoch, her concerns about the cost of net zero. I want to know which one of them is going to push for shale gas. I really do think it's important. Gareth here has also messaged in, where's the sensible Tories? Likes of Mark Harper, Desmond Swain, Graham Brady, Steve Baker, David Frost. Why is the leadership line up such a terrible choice? Well, essentially, the likes of Steve Baker, he's lined up behind Suella Braverman. I haven't heard about the others, what they've done, but it looks like Suella, but possibly Kemi Badenoch also, who is a committed Brexiteer. I think those are the ones that will essentially represent sort of the ERG side of the Conservative Party. That is going to be critical going forwards. We'll take your calls coming up and lots more messages. There's so much going on. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Hi there, good afternoon, and welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Lots of calls and messages coming in. Good news, folks. I was wrong, because apparently, according to, Puffin Blowback, I'm mistaken. Kemi's not the only one who is talking about net zero. I'm delighted to hear that Suella Braverman is going to stop it also and get us out of the European Court of Human Rights, Convention on Human Rights. We've got a real fight on our hands, apparently, Suella Braverman sets out. I just want to check that, but I hope Puffin is right on that. Meanwhile, Les in Northant says, whoever becomes PM needs to quickly sort out the cost of living crisis, the illegal migrant problem, ditch the net zero plans, have integrity, note Boris, and have no skeletons in their cupboard. That last thing may be a little bit tricky, but maybe it depends on the scale and the number of skeletons in the closet. Who knows? Let's go down to Petersfield, where Rob's on the line. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Hi, what's on your mind? What's on your manifesto? Who's going to get your vote?
Well, there's only one person who's going to win the next election outright for the Tories, and that's Penny Mordaunt. And you mentioned this morning that she had a problem identifying what a woman was. Well, if you read her social media page, she addresses it absolutely this morning. She asked the question, what is a woman? And she goes on to answer it. And she says, in one of those tweets, I am biologically a woman. If I have a hysterectomy or mastectomy, I am still a woman. And I'm legally a woman. Some people born male who have been through the gender recognition process, reassignment process, are also legally female. That does not mean they are biological women like me. I'm not sure you can be much clearer than that. And in terms of messaging, isn't that refreshing for the honesty, whether you agree with the message or not?
So, Rob, certainly lots of support coming in for Penny Mordaunt on the feed this morning and calls. She is definitely going up my Snakes and Ladders leadership board without question. I think that there was that issue there. It has taken I read those tweets because I touched on it earlier. It's taken I think she put out 8 tweets. There's another question about at the back end of it as to what her views is about trans women taking part in women's sports, which I think she was a little bit sitting on the fence.
She's absolutely addressed that and said that she supports Sharon Davis and David Thompson and UK sport.
Are you? Because I read that tweet. Are you happy that completely addresses it and that she's with Sharon Davis on that?
I think absolutely, in my mind. And there's another aspect of Penny Mordaunt. If she can give her maiden speech by referring to male chickens as a dare from some Royal Marine officers who spoke to her the night before the dinner, and spend 3.5 minutes talking about male chickens and the vernacular use of the word there, what an outstanding player and sense of humour she's got. She's got the characteristics, the charisma, the only one of the current candidates who is going to beat.
And where do you think she is on net zero? Has she expressed a view on that? I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't read it. She does say that she's going to address the economy in the coming few days.
Very good, Rob. Well, that's as I say, Rob, there's lots of support. There's one here from Terry who actually lives in her constituency. She would support Penny, an excellent choice. She voted Brexit, but I will not make my mind up, Terry says, until I hear clearly what each one of them will do about the Channel migrant crisis. Rob, thank you so much for your call. Fascinating thoughts there. More support for Penny Mordaunt, who is climbing rapidly up my Snakes and Ladders. Rishi Sunak has slipped down to the bottom. Of course, I should clarify that Boris Johnson is not even on the leadership board. He's a goner. Ben Wallace wrote himself off. He's a goner. Steve Baker's a goner. Who knows? I think Liz Truss has confirmed that she is standing, and that will be significant to see what she says. Anyway, we're going to head from Petersfield up to Bedfordshire, where Victor is on the line. Hi, Victor.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, what's on your mind?
As far as the migrant issue, well, beyond that, I think there's a loss of identity that many people feel in this country. I think it'd be harder for the likes of Sunak and Javid and any of the Bain candidates. I think it'll be harder for them to tackle this issue. I think there's no getting away from that.
Yeah, I don't sense that. I mean, I think it's wonderfully refreshing that there's such a breadth of diversity of ethnic minorities, male and females in the Tory list of candidates, and it seems to me that actually it's the women that are making all the running. Whether it's Penny Mordaunt, whether it's Suella Braverman, whether it's I think the courage of Kemi Badenoch coming forwards, what she's blatantly saying. I think it's really interesting.
It is interesting, but if you look at, for example, Zahawi, although he on paper is a good candidate, I mean, if you look at what he's achieved since coming here, but I mean, his background is Iraqi. He's Iraqi, came here as a refugee, and I think he's already proposed an amnesty, for example, for the 60,000 people that are here.
Has he? I hadn't seen that. I mean, there's no question he's had a very successful business life. Yeah. Very close. My concerns about Zahawi is when he was vaccines minister, although he did organise a good rollout, I don't think he was completely honest with us when he was talking about who would get the vaccine, who needed the vaccine. I never supported children being vaccinated. So for me, I have concerns about that. But look, he's a successful guy.
Internationalist. If you look, for example, Rishi Sunak, aside from the fact that he's Indian, he's also what you call an internationalist. He has no allegiance to any country. He's got an American passport, I believe.
That's right. He had a green card. There's no question he's a globalist, and I think Sunak's made a big mistake ruling out early tax cuts. I think that actually it shows that he's out of touch with the pain that people are suffering.
You don't always get what you want, but I think the ideal candidate would be someone with an affinity for this country, someone British-born. Obviously, that's not always possible. Some of them pulled out. But that's what we really need. I mean, a Prime Minister to me, a British PM, is Margaret Thatcher, Edward Heath, Harold Wilson.
They certainly were all Prime Ministers of that, there is no doubt. For me, I think there's an amazing breadth to the list of candidates. Equally, I think that Sunak, he may well make the last two, but unless he backtracks on his tax commitments, I think he's in real trouble. Victor, thank you so much for your thoughts there. That was Victor in Bedfordshire. Lots more messages coming in here. We've got Carl. This is good. Kemi Badenoch would cut the legs from under the woke, self-righteous Labour Party in a heartbeat. Young, dynamic, forthright black woman who voted to leave the EU would make Starmer and his band of hypocrites spontaneously combust. That was from Carl. There we are, no nonsense from Carl. Meanwhile, Dawn says, how much would it cost to heat the House of Commons and Downing Street? Should they move to cheaper premises to heat and maintain? I think maybe what they've got to find out is just ways to reduce the cost. That is for sure. Keep those calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. I want to hear your views, your thoughts. There are lots of people joining the leadership board of Snakes and Ladders this morning. There's no question that it is the females who are rising up the list. There's very little chat, actually, about Nadeem Zahawi on Twitter this morning. He's announced his campaign, but he hasn't really... I don't think he's got himself in the newspapers in the same way that some of the others has. So he needs to sort out his comms and get that going if he wants to get properly a real clear message. Coming up, we're going to be talking about sport, Wimbledon, tennis, but most importantly of all, I want your thoughts, your views on the leadership contest, your manifesto, net zero. Stay with us. It's the home of common sense. We're prepared to talk about anything. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Nadira Tudor. The number of contenders in the running for Conservative Party leader has gone up to 9 as Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt joined the race. Taxes and whether or not to cut them is emerging as a focal point, and there are warnings from Tory grandees that the party is ripping itself apart as they call for an end to tech toxicity. But speaking to Times Radio, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who is in the running, pledged to keep his campaign clean.
You know, I've spoken to all the other, I think now every other candidate in this campaign and said, you know, the way I will fight this is I'm just not interested in talking about personalities or anything. Let's just talk about the policies, and we can disagree on the emphasis or the detail. That's fine, but actually in the end, we're all Conservatives and we all want what's best for the country.
Meanwhile, there are calls for an immediate investigation into claims Boris Johnson lobbied for a young woman to get a City Hall job during his time as London Mayor. The Sunday Times has reported there were allegations Mr Johnson advocated for a role for her in 2008, just weeks after they met. At least 10 people have been killed after Russian rockets hit an apartment block in Ukraine's Donetsk region. That's according to the area's governor, who fears more than 30 people are still trapped in the ruins. Pope Francis has expressed solidarity with the people of Sri Lanka amid political and economic instability that has rocked the country. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced he'll be stepping down this week after protesters stormed his official residence. And parts of the UK could see temperatures pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius today as a heat health alert has been issued for most of the country. The heat wave is likely to last into next week, with temperatures set to soar above 32 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk. We are into the last half hour of the show. I don't know where time has gone. There's so much going on. Tweets pouring in, calls as well. We'll take some more calls. Keep those coming. 0344 499 1000. But amongst all the chat about leadership and everything, there's also the huge challenge of being at the top of tennis. And of course, today it's the last day of Wimbledon. It's Wimbledon final, men's final day. Yesterday, of course, was the women's final. And Elena Rybakina beat Ons Jabeur, and I'm delighted to be joined by the TalkSport tennis correspondent Lisa O'Sullivan to talk about yesterday and today. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Richard. Nice to be here.
So, were you there yesterday?
I was able to enjoy it. I wasn't actually there in person.
Right,
I'm
got
afraid
it.
I have picked it up, the dreaded Rona, so
bad
I'm
luck.
watching from home.
Right, okay, excellent. You're at home. So, that was, obviously a great match, great victory. But if we look forward to this afternoon, we've got two amazing tennis players. Give us your view as to the pros and cons of each of them and who you think might win.
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be an absolutely brilliant men's final at Wimbledon. I don't think we'll have seen anything quite like this before. We've got Novak Djokovic, who is looking for his 4th consecutive title. He hasn't been beaten at the All England Club for more than 5 years and is looking for his 21st Grand Slam title, because Novak Djokovic is really keen to be crowned the greatest of all time. It would take him ahead of Roger Federer, who's got 20. It would pull him up one behind Rafa Nadal, who in Paris this year just moved ahead with 22 Grand Slams. So that's one side of the puzzle. The other side is Nick Kyrgios, who has never won a Grand Slam before, who has this label as being the bad boy of tennis, but who has a brilliant game to watch.
Indeed. He's slightly the lovable rogue, isn't he?
He is very much so. Some people really don't like him at all. Some people absolutely love him. And he is bringing in people who don't like tennis to watch the match as well, which is fantastic. And he also goes into this match having beaten Novak Djokovic twice. Djokovic has never beaten Nick Kyrgios.
That's fascinating. So that's that could be a real mental block, even though Djokovic, I mean, he's so experienced. He would sort of try and put that out of his mind. But maybe Kyrgios... Does the fact that Kyrgios didn't play in the semi because he essentially got a walkover, unfortunately, does that help him or hinder him in terms of preparation versus fatigue?
That's a big question, isn't it, really? I mean, the thing about Nick Kyrgios that has partly been a problem for him in his career is his mental approach to matches and the fact that he does live in his head quite a lot. He gave us a press conference on Friday and admitted that he had been thinking a lot about winning. He'd been thinking about losing. He hadn't slept when he heard that Rafa Nadal had to pull out of that semi-final. So I think, and he then scheduled a training session that would be as close to being on court for the time that you would be for a semi-final as possible. But you can't recreate that kind of atmosphere.
No, and the tension, the competitive edge.
Exactly, and you don't want the edge taken off this far into the competition because you've taken so many matches, and with a Grand Slam, it just builds and builds and builds, and you really don't want that momentum to have been halted just because you haven't been able to get on course.
For sure. So, you have to put your money where your mouth is now, Lisa. Come on. Who wins in 3, 4 or 5 sets?
I think it will go the distance. Nick Kyrgios has never lost in 5 sets.
Wow.
So I think it will be Nick Kyrgios.
You think it'll be Nick Kyrgios? Fascinating.
But it could be Djokovic. And I think it'll be Kyrgios.
No, okay, so you think it'll be Kyrgios. And what do you know what the betting odds are? Is he the favourite or is Djokovic the favourite?
I'm sorry, I haven't actually looked at those. It really could go down to the toss of a coin. Novak Djokovic is going to take to that court with a large proportion of centre court backing Nick Kyrgios, as they did for Cameron Norrie in the semi-final. And Djokovic spoke about how difficult it was playing when you know that a large proportion of the crowd are supporting your opponent. So that's one hurdle he's going to have to get over as well. So he's going to be looking for a fast start, but he needs to find a way past Nick Kyrgios's serve. So if Kyrgios is serving as well as he does, he effectively takes 4 points to hold serve.
Yes.
So that could be the key.
You think that could be the key. Kyrgios' serve could well win it. That's Lisa's tip. Lisa, thank you so much indeed. That's Lisa O'Sullivan, TalkSport's incredible tennis correspondent. What an afternoon that will be, starting, I think, at 2 o'clock. We've still got plenty of time left on the show before we hand over to Tricia at 1 o'clock for the next 3 hours. But in Oxfordshire, we've got Peter on the line. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, I think you ought to get going with your party. I think that will do the job. But the point I want you to make is that just about green energy, etc.
Yes.
There's about 350,000 wind turbines producing or extracting about 1 million megawatts of kinetic energy from the Earth's weather systems.
Is that around it can't be 350. Did you say how many turbines?
350,000.
What, around the world?
Yeah.
You sure about that?
Well, I think it is.
Sounds a lot. Anyway, right, yes, sorry, carry on.
Yeah. Producing about 1 million megawatts of kinetic energy, extracting about 1 million megawatts of kinetic energy from the Earth's weather systems.
Yes.
Now, my point is that is affecting weather patterns across the world, you know, creating droughts and floods in different places.
Interesting thesis. And are you a scientist or an engineer? Have you got a background in that to give you additional knowledge? Because I'm just a layman on this.
Well, I suppose I'm more of a layman, but I'm engineering. But the other point is, and similarly, you've got solar panels are taking heat energy from the land masses, and so the air currents from the sea are going to replace that heat loss because they, you know, Earth likes to balance things out a bit. But, right, OK, that's what I thought I'd throw in there. But about the Conservatives' election, I don't think any of the ones that are standing are any good. And you say Penny Mordaunt's coming up and standing, but, I mean, it's like you're saying about Boris Johnson, saying one thing, now she's all for trans, now, oh, no, she could change her mind, and that's OK.
That's a key point, that. I think trust in politicians has slipped to such a low level, and all of a sudden she realises she needs to row back on it. And other people have also mentioned that on social media this morning, Peter.
Yep.
No.
So I think it's all. Well, I don't think I'll vote Conservatives again, and I'm just waiting for your party.
Well, we're battling on, and come the next election, whenever it is, we'll have 600 candidates, give more choice, more options, more debate. Yep. Peter, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Peter in Oxfordshire. Interesting point he makes. The huge quantity of energy that's extracted essentially from climate by the wind turbines, could that possibly have an impact on other weather patterns. I'm just a layman. I read things. I haven't read that. If there's any of you out there who are scientists or experts in that field, in that weather, please do give us a call, get in touch to have a real view on that. Fascinating thought. More messages coming in. One here, one from Brian, who says, I've not heard anybody compare Sunak to Osborne's austerity performance when Chancellor. We've suffered Osborne's changes for too long after he left, with the removal of the flat VAT for the self-employed. The prospect of Sunak frightens me. That's Brian. Then we've got one here who says, where have we gone? No, we've got Lucy, who in Northern Ireland, who says we need a much younger Prime Minister, a woman this time, who's in touch. One who's held with respect by their colleagues and most of all the general public. Then a good job will prevail. But what Lucy doesn't say is who she thinks that is. Maybe that's because actually there are so many really interesting women who are in the list. Give us your thoughts. You know the number. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends, to the last 15 minutes of Tice Talk before the amazing Trisha Goddard takes over for the next 3 hours, and then, of course, Kevin O'Sullivan. Lots of messages chill coming in. Shirley says, what's the point in discussing the new Conservative leader? We don't have a vote, so we have to put up with whoever's elected. Well, actually, tens of thousands, possibly 100,000 or 200,000 Conservative members do have a vote, and they are clearly interested. And I think, of course, the next leader does affect all of us. Meanwhile, Jay on Prison Island says, I don't think the Conservatives or Labour really want to reform the voting system that works for them. Well, actually, many in the Labour Party recognise they probably can't get a majority at all now, so they're really interested in PR. We're going to head north to Manchester, where Jackie's on the line. Hi there, Jackie.
Good afternoon, Richard. I've got a question for you.
Go for it. I may or may not be able to answer.
Under our constitution, we vote for the party which puts out a manifesto for the time that they're in government.
Yes.
We haven't had a change of party, even though we're having a change of leader. So all these candidates that are promising various things, whether it be net zero, etc., surely it will be a continuation of what we've had, because they're not going to rewrite the manifesto.
That's a really good question, actually, Jackie. Now, technically, well, first of all, we don't have a written constitution, but technically you vote for someone to be your MP, and it's the party with the most MPs that forms the government. So that's the sort of the boring technical bit. But you're absolutely right. People voted for a manifesto. Many people may have felt, even if they technically were voting for their local MP, they were attracted to the overall manifesto, the Boris Johnson view of getting Brexit done, and that stands. But as we know, very often political parties, they break their promises in their manifesto, and I think that is a real concern to people, Jackie.
Yeah. I just wondered, with them promising various things, and especially net zero. I mean, I don't know whether I'm right. Have we put that into law?
Yes, unfortunately, and this is the really shocking thing, Jackie, Theresa May put that into law back in, I think, 2019, after a mere 90 minutes of debate in the House of Commons, as one of her last acts as Prime Minister. And I don't even think there was a vote on it, because no one put their hand up to object. So, I mean, you know, and yes, you could say net zero was in their manifesto. The truth was, because it was in every party's manifesto, standing at that general election, who was represented in the House of Commons, essentially there was no choice for people. And so my point is, and that's why at the next election there will be a genuine choice, I think that the whole issue of net zero is massively rising up the agenda.
Yes.
Jackie, thank you so much for your thoughts. Let's keep in touch on that. That was Jackie with her question about whether or not the next leader of the Tory party will have to stick to the manifesto or not. So let's see what we've got. Here we are. We've got another one supporting Penny Mordaunt. She really has soared to the top of the ladder on my Snakes and Ladders leaderboard. She's a Brexiteer and ex-forces. A lot of people keen on the fact that ex-forces, which is very interesting. Now we're going to go to, where am I heading to? I'm heading up to Scotland, to Montrose, where David's on the line. Hi, David.
Hello there, yes. I've just kind of blundered onto your programme about an hour ago.
Ah, fantastic. Well, welcome to Talk TV. Are you a first-time listener, David?
Yes.
That's amazing. And within an hour, you're tempted to pick up the phone and give me a nice time or a hard time. Which is it?
Well, I think it's a nice time. I noticed you said that you had 600 people standing in the next general election.
Yes.
Is there any in Scotland?
That will include Scotland, absolutely, David. We won't stand in Northern Ireland, but our intention is to stand pretty much everywhere else. And Scotland's a wonderful part of the UK.
And how do you stand against the devolved government up here, party up here,
we're obviously
SNP up here?
Indeed, fundamentally, I'm pro the union. I think that it is absolutely vital to keep the UK together. I mean, Scotland's been part of with England in the active union for over 300 years. If you're a first-time listener, David, go back on the app to my show last week, because my Sunday sermon at about 10:05 last Sunday was on my views of the withdrawal agreement negotiations before a referendum, if there was to be another referendum, which, of course, Nicola Sturgeon wants.
Yeah, well, I'll have a look on there, but I've been a Tory for the last 50 years, and this is the last time. What they did to Boris Johnson, the backstabbers that they had in his party, I mean, I think it's the worst thing that the Tories have ever done.
Fascinating. And David, were you a Brexiteer or did you vote
Yes,
Remain?
And I never ever voted for joining the EU. I was against it when they first did it, and I've always been against it because there was too much money going to too few people in the EU.
There you are.
We were paying too much for it.
You were right in the first place, David, and you're right now. Don't lose heart. It's the right thing to do. My concern, David, is that Boris Johnson, having played such a massive role in securing Brexit, he hasn't taken advantage of the opportunity. David, keep listening. Thank you so much for calling so quickly after finding Talk TV. I'm not quite sure whether that was on TV or on the radio, but anyway, that's great. New callers, new people, because we're the home of common sense. We tell it as it is, whichever way people want to view. David there in Scotland. We're going to head south to Birmingham. Final caller is Arthur. Hi there, Arthur.
Hi, Richard. I've been tossing something up in my mind, Richard. If I'm going to give you three names now, Hunt, Sunak and Javid, mainly from the left of the Liberal side of the Tory party. And all of a sudden, our friend Mr Wallace not putting his name forward. If anybody on the left-hand side of the party could have done them three people damage, it could have been him, if he'd have stood. Do you understand what I'm saying? Taking votes away from them. And I've got a funny feeling that there may have been talk already asking him not to stand.
Interesting. That's a very interesting theory. You think that he may have been sort of... I mean, look, he's a military man. He would have been... he's passionate about his job as Defence Secretary, where I think he's doing a great job. So you think some of them might have promised him that he can stay Defence Secretary? Because, of course, that's a key thing.
Absolutely. And while we're on the subject, could I also mention the silence from Priti Patel? Because I also want Priti Patel to carry on with her role.
It is fascinating. She is almost completely silent... to the point where there's almost an implicit assumption she won't stand, but maybe she'll start late. Would you like her to stand?
I would like her to stand, yes.
And are you a member, if I can ask, of the Conservative Party? Do you have a vote, or are you just an interested...
I am a member, yes.
Excellent. So, and if she did stand, would you vote for her, or are you interested in just what her contribution to the debate?
I believe the contribution she's making is most important. My vote will go to Penny Mordaunt, no doubt about that.
That's fascinating. I don't know if you've been listening much through the show, but I'm running my sort of leaders board, the ladders and snakes, and Penny Mordaunt, without question, has shot right to the top of the ladder. She seems to be addressing the issue of her previous comments about...
when you refer to the military at the side of the Tory party currently, Penny Mordaunt is actually a commander, a reserve commander in the Royal Navy.
That's right. And funny enough, that's been clarified to me by Terry in Portsmouth, who's she remains a naval reservist.
Yes.
She was in the Royal Navy, wasn't she?
Yes, she was, yes.
And there's a real appetite, actually, Arthur, for people who've been in the military. Tom Tugan has got some support today. Penny Mordaunt, and that I think in itself is interesting, people's enthusiasm for that military discipline.
Yeah, I can't argue with that at all.
And were you a Brexiteer, or were you...
Oh, yes, I was a Brexiteer.
You were a Brexiteer.
About that, yeah.
So what we do want, though, Arthur, is we've got this platform of opportunity. Boris just didn't take advantage of it properly. Do you think...
I am sorry for Boris. He made some tactical moves, but he made some silly moves as well.
Yeah, I mean, he blew it through his own stupidity.
Yeah, he did, basically. Yeah, he did, yeah.
But
still, let's hope we can pick up the parcel and start running with it again.
Yeah, well, that's right. Arthur, thank you so much indeed for that. Okay. Lots more tweets and messages. That was Arthur in Birmingham. He wants Priti Patel to stand, but even so, he's actually going to vote for Penny Mordaunt. I would say that she's got the most support, followed by Suella Braverman on my leadership board, my snakes and ladders. Sunak has plummeted to the bottom of the... he's slithered and slid down the snake. He's way down the bottom. I don't see where he goes. We've got Lisa in Northampton who's tweeted, and I don't care what party as long as they don't support the World Economic Forum and they want breakfast. not breakfast, they want Brexit. But can you make sure somebody other than the big three stand in the Daventry constituency? Yes, there'll be lots of more there. Oh, she doesn't like Chris Heaton-Harris. There we go. I think she wants... no, she doesn't. She wouldn't want Penny Mordaunt. There we are. So, lots of other messages coming in, and here we are. One is Peter in Helsham. All of those say they voted for their local Conservative member, not the party. Why didn't they vote for their Labour candidate? And they'll reply, because of Corbyn. Really good point, Peter. So, you're saying there's an inconsistency there. I think it's a blend of the two if you know your local MP or not. Anyway, we've come to the end of the show. Time has flown by, lots going on. And there's no question that, as I keep talking about my leadership snakes and ladders over the coming weeks, it'll be a great, really fascinating to see what happens. Trisha is on the end of the line. Sorry, Trisha, I've been rambling on. What's going on your show?
I'm just laughing at your snakes and ladders. I think there's quite a lot of snakes on there.
Absolutely. It's a bit harsh, but there we are.
Yes, a bit harsh. Well, of course, we're going to be looking at politics as well, probably from slightly different angles, because we've got our faith panel today. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at some of the issues behind what's happened through the eyes of our faith panel. We have our doctor in the house. We have our mental health issue of the house. And we are looking at a podcast from rural areas at long last.